No, that's not my, it's not on my goal list.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't.
Did you hear how they're gonna do the Olympics this year?
Pardon?
Did you hear how they're doing the
You
Olympics?
like winning
How they're
Quidditch or
Down
something?
the center.
We're good to go now. Thanks.
We're ready? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the monthly meeting of the McMinnville Water and Light Commission. Today is June 18th, 2024. And I would like to call the meeting to order and ask our clerk to do a roll call, please.
Yes, Mayor Dropkin,
Here.
Commissioner Tate,
Here.
Commissioner Tankersley,
Here.
Commissioner Gormley,
Here.
Commissioner Christensen.
Here. Thank you. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the consent agenda, and does any commissioner need anything pulled off the consent agenda and heard at its regular place on the agenda?
I'm fine. Please, if you would pull the audit engagement letter off, please.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so we're removing item B from the consent agenda. I'll now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda less item B.
So moved.
I have a motion from Commissioner Gormley. Second. And a second from Chair Tate. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, say nay. Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. I'd like to now go to item B, the audit engagement letter for fiscal year 23-24. And I would invite our finance director, Mark Benmeyer, to come up and give us a presentation on the item.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the commission. So each year, as a part of our audit engagement, audit standards require that the auditors provide an engagement letter. And so the request is that the commission would authorize the mayor and clerk to sign there's a couple of items that the engagement letter referenced that I think I understand there were some questions about, and so we did a little research. The first one had to do with the dissemination of our financial statements. Our financial statements were a component unit of the city of McMinnville, stated that way on our financial statements. So we provide our financials to the city, and the numbers that are in our combined financial statements end up in the city's financial statements in a column on their financials indicating that it's I think it says department, a component unit. And so anyway, the question was, the wording in here appears to make it look like that we can't share the audit report in part or in it says here our audit of the financial statements. This is the auditors
What page
speaking.
are you on?
I am on page 6 of the engagement letter.
Thank you.
Says our report on the financial statement. I'm down in the kind of the second paragraph up from the bottom of the page, dissemination of financial statements. Our report on the financial statements must be associated only with the financial statements that were the subject of our engagement. You can make copies of the report, but you can't, but only if the entire financial statements, including the related footnotes and supplementary information as appropriate, are reproduced and distributed with our report. You agree not to reproduce or associate our report with any other financial statements or portions thereof that are not the subject of this engagement. So that particularly that last statement gets pretty confusing about, with our audit going over to the city. And actually what that relates to, we always refer to the whole, this is our 2023 audit report. And we always consider this as the audit report. But the audit report is actually the first couple of pages in the audit report, the report of the independent auditors, which includes their opinion. And so that's what we can't take this out of context of the entire audit document. It's associated only with that. You can't remove that and associate with some other information or either in or part. So that's what this relates to, that statement. So we talked to Keith Simovic, our audit partner, about that today, and he confirmed that, and also that they are well aware that we share this with the city. In fact, the city's auditors contact Keith directly, just because they rely on the audit report that is generated from our auditors And so they contact him directly and just inquire that everything was good on our audit. And so they have no concern at all that we're sharing the audit with the city and would expect us to do so.
So are they gonna reform the language in the contract?
No, because that language relates specifically to this independent auditor report. And the rest of this is considered to be the financial statements and supplementary information. So
So will they will they just send us a note that says they understand the way this works with the city? I mean, that
Sure.
would be, this is my concern when I read this, and I'd be happy if they did that.
yep, I can have them send something that we could put in the package.
Great.
Okay,
Is this new language?
No,
It's always been this way. Okay.
so
yeah, he
I
did
didn't think
did
it
provide
was
an
a
email.
problem. I just didn't want, when I read it, it jumped out at me because I knew the city needed this from us, and I didn't want to have a problem if something came up. I wanted to be sure we had permission to do that.
thank you.
He
So
did-
should we delay action on this
Yeah,
item
no,
then
I
until
think
we
we-
get an amendment?
I don't advise. I'm willing to make a motion to authorize the mayor and the clerk to sign the engagement letter when staff has received an acceptable written confirmation from the auditors that they understand or are agreeable with us.
I think we've actually already have that.
We did. He provided an email today.
Okay, well, if you have it, then that's fine. I'm
Yeah.
willing to let staff
I just
decide.
don't know if it's in a formal enough format, but yeah.
Was there a second item?
Second. Oh,
I'm sorry. Was there a second thing you were?
My,
gonna-
my second item had was the same thing, basically, it was the use of their names, and I didn't know, but I thought that the city might in their report say that Moss Adams had done the financial statements for, or had done the audit report for
Right.
Water and Light, and this says they can't, we need their permission for
Well,
that too.
Yeah, we can't use their name. We can't attach their name to other documents or use their name.
But
outside
the
of
city, does the city mention Moss Adams?
The city
I
actually
didn't know.
doesn't. in the
Oh,
report,
good.
doesn't, But they
Okay.
also understand that our report is a public document. It's available on the state's website. So it's out in the public realm. So anybody could take it and reproduce it. We just
Right.
shouldn't be attaching their opinion
Yeah.
to other financial statements.
I mean,
That's
it's in, it goes, it's in its entirety.
in its entirety.
Yeah,
That's the
okay, that
point.
makes sense.
That is the point.
Okay.
Great, I would entertain a motion then to approve the audit engagement letter.
Second. Yeah, I already moved to do it, subject to that coming.
Okay, and so we're
Staff-
considering that resolved. So I have a motion from Commissioner Tankersley and a second from Commissioner Gormley. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Right.
And opposed, say nay. That motion is passes unanimously. Have commissioners had an opportunity to review accounts payable and purchasing reports? And are there any questions?
No issues here?
No.
Mm-mm.
Thank you. And now we're going to our partner reports. And so I would invite up our city manager, Jeff Towery, to give us an update on the city of McMinnville. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Evening, Judge.
This has become familiar enough that Tad was sure it was only about a month since I've been here the last time. So hoping that it's not a familiarity breeding contempt circumstance. Happy to see you all.
When were you here last?
It was 3 months ago. Yeah,
Okay, I
it just,
feel better. If it was 6 months, I was gonna.
it was a rapid feeling 3 months, at least to me and to John.
Yeah.
It sort of jumped up for both of us. Thanks to Trina for keeping us both in line. That's not mine. but-
No.
I mean, happy to talk about it, but I don't know what any of that stuff, I don't know what any of that stuff means. That looks more familiar.
I feel better.
It does. It does. Thank you. So a few updates for you across the city. Working through a pretty significant sewer rehab project in the Chandler's Edition. We brought forward proposed engineering services fee schedule to the council in a work session last week and got some good feedback from the council. We've got the item scheduled for a public hearing and potential adoption at next week's regular council meeting. There are a couple of areas where We're not going to pursue full cost recovery. We want to continue to support affordable housing. There are some of our fees that are related to, say, sidewalk improvements and street tree replacement that we want to encourage. And we'll be keeping those more affordable, and we'll be having an opportunity for folks to substantially avoid those fees if the sidewalk damage is related to a tree species that the city required that ultimately caused the damage. So we're going to try to make it affordable. We're going to try to make sure that we continue to encourage housing. We're also going to create sort of a grace period so that projects that are in the works but haven't been fully permitted yet will be processed under our current fee schedule, which is pretty limited. I think it's not too late to get a $5 fee for
Driveway
a driveway
or sidewalk.
or sidewalk. permit.
Yes, because
So-
the last time the engineering fees were updated in the city of McMinnville was 1958.
I would say,
Oh.
and
Oh, did I steal your thunder?
no, I was gonna say, I was
That's-
notwithstanding my countenance, I was not born. at that point. So, pre-Jeff. I know.
Are you ranking on us older folks? Come on.
Not at all, not at all. We've also started the crack sealing work and the preliminary work for our summer slurry seal and pavement patching. I actually see a bunch of those signs on the west end of town because I drive that area of town a lot. And so that'll be underway soon. And we've also selected a consultant to design our Safe Routes to Schools program near Patton and Buell, Patton Middle and Buell Elementary. Until there's a question.
Chandler's Edition, you want to tell the commission what that covers? I think it's down Booth Bend Road. kind of
Yes,
stuff.
it is in that neck of the woods.
Okay.
Yeah.
You'll see a lot of equipment staged on some Linfield property in there.
Yeah, they were
Sorry,
actually,
fine.
they were actually, one of the sort of the right lane turning on to Booth Bend was actually closed today. They were doing some work right near the intersection. Our summer fun kickoff is this Friday. We're really excited. This, I think, is the third or fourth year of collaboration between the Parks and Rec Department and the Library Department. So we've got events in City Park and at the Senior Center. Lots of activities for lots of folks. The team did a great job coming up with a bilingual kind of program and passport this year for the kids, so that as they go to activities over the course of the summer, they can get their passport stamped. I'll also say that on the 21st, as while the kickoff of Mac Fresco is going on, that's the rebranded Dine Out program in downtown McMinnville. There'll be our first city support Juneteenth celebration out in front of Beerly Brewing. There'll be music and speakers and great fun will be had by all. It looks like it's going to be great weather. We are also bringing forward our Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan that is coming to the council for adoption on June 25th. That will be a significant culmination of what has been a 2+ year planning effort. We have engaged nearly 4,000 unique individuals in the community as we have done our communication, outreach, and engagement. And we're very proud of the work. Still other work to be done, but well, glad to be able to have that. Our Parks Master Plan is the oldest of our master plans. I think the last one was done in 1999. And so we're happy to have a new Parks Master Plan to work from. We also recently did our first polling on Parks, Recreation, Culture, Parks, and Recreation facility improvements. We asked people a question that we always ask when we do initial polling. You see that 88.6% of the people who live here are very or somewhat satisfied with their quality of life. And that's a notable increase over just a year ago when we did our last poll. We asked them about our new rec center, which would include aquatic center, parks improvements, library enhancements, and senior center update. We asked the question about general obligation bond in the amount of about $152 million, which translates to about $52 a month on a property tax bill. And we got 52% of the likely voters who were surveyed supported the full package, all of these. The other thing that was interesting is we also started to ask questions. We pulled pieces out, and as we pulled pieces out, the support dropped substantially to below 40%. So we thought that was an interesting reaction. I think better numbers than we expected. We're going to spend the next several months doing more community engagement and outreach around all of these projects. We'll probably do another poll late in the calendar year and bring a potential action forward for the council to consider a bond measure in the May 25 election. So looking forward to continuing to partner with Water and Light on that project as we move forward as well. We also got, this is weird, I got like 4 copies of the same slide in my, so I don't know what's going on with the copier. We got a grant of $150,000 from the YCCO this year to help establish a library of things at the library. It's very exciting. I will let the mayor tell you a story when she chooses about an experience that she had at the community fair, which there's a slide here later. Maybe I'll give you a chance to tell that story when I get to that slide. I think it's a great story, but it's the mayor's to tell. Speaking of the community fair, thank you for participating in the community fair again this year. And for those of you who are able to attend in person, we really appreciate it. But we also had a lot of staff from a lot of partner organizations and a lot of great interactive activities for kids and families. I was unfortunately traveling and had to live vicariously through others. It was a great event. And I guess at this point, I will pause my presentation to see if the mayor would like to tell her story, because I think it's a great story.
Okay, well, it's 3 stories in one.
It
I'll
is.
go quick.
It's it's like a triple scoop of gelato.
Okay, so it's kind of about the impact of the community fair. So thing number 1 that happened was we had a gentleman just was out riding his bike, who's doing pretty hardcore mountain biking, big heavy helmet on. I was standing over with the fire district at the time. He rode up on his bicycle, he took his helmet off and he said, "Hi, he introduced himself. I'm a former combat medic and I'd like to volunteer with you." Cool. That was awesome. Then I went over to the library booth and bookmobile, and a parent said to their child, "Oh, look at this sewing machine, you can win this." And our librarian said, "No, you can check this out from the library. It's not a raffle." And the parent said to the child, "Oh, well, this is so great, honey. You've outgrown your little kid sewing machine, and now we can go and we can get you this one that you can keep learning and growing your skill on." And then this woman came up to the library booth and she said, "I really want to thank you. I have been wanting to join the Makalelees." If you don't know, that's the ukulele group that practices here in McMinnville. "I've been wanting to join the Makalelees, and I was going to go check out, or I was going to go buy a ukulele, and then I heard I could check one out from your library. So I checked one out, and I really want to thank you because I do not want to learn how to play."
I love it.
I want to add to your thunder that I was there, Sam was there. But the presentation you did was great. I mean, you sounded great, but the diversity with the Spanish entertainment and stuff, I was really touched by that. And it was well received, and so congratulations on that. That was a really nice thing to do.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you that.
too. It was very successful. I think it'll continue to grow and we'll keep learning and hopefully doing it better each year. So yeah, thanks for being there.
And so also just to remind you, if you don't know, there's a general election coming up. The election is on November 5th this year. Filing for office opened on June 5th, closes on August 27th. We have 3 counselors and the mayor up for full 4-year terms, Ward 1, Ward 2, and Ward 3, of course. Current incumbents are Councilors Chenoweth, Minke, and Council President Garvin, and of course, Mayor Drapkin's term is up as well. All of them are 4-year terms that will begin in January of 2025. The city recorder is the city's elections official, and any questions you have or any questions you hear from folks, feel free to refer them directly to Claudia, and she can help out. And I'm happy to answer questions about anything that I reported on tonight or anything else that's city related. I can do my best.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll open it up. General questions?
Real quick, I thought I heard you say that the dine out was gonna start soon. When will that be?
So it's gonna be rebranded as Mac Fresco. It starts this week.
Okay.
So it'll start on Friday.
Okay. And will it be still this, I know it's got a new name. Will it look similar to what it did before?
So part of what they're doing, so there's a couple of dynamics. One is that, you know, you all remember that Dine Out was one of our responses to the pandemic. And one of the things that the MDA has heard as they've talked to folks is it feels, you know, every time they hear Dine Out, they're reminded of the pandemic, and it was a survival exercise. And they've sort of said, we want something that's sort of fresh and it doesn't have to remind us of the pandemic. They also want to make sure that it's more broadly representative of the full business community and not just about restaurants, and Dine Out sort of makes you think that. And so they've rebranded it to Mac Fresco. If you haven't been downtown in the last week or so, there are brand new banners up, different colors, different logos. Their focus is on art and dining and drinking and shopping. And so they're hoping that'll be a more robust experience for the whole downtown business community. This year, again, the kickoff, there'll be lots of music. I think there's going to be music in every block this year. That isn't necessarily the case. They usually sort of trade the music around, but I think there's going to be more music since it's a kickoff weekend. I think folks are really excited and looking forward to it. There'll be a new art that goes down on the corners and the same fun use of our community living room that we've enjoyed the last several years.
Super. Thank you.
So if I could just share a moment, I saw you Saturday.
You did.
So this Saturday, there was a raising the roof ceremony, and often construction, especially steel construction, we call it the topping out ceremony, and there's a tree that's put at the top of that. This happened to have a 19-foot tree suspended from the ceiling. Anyway, they had to totally redo the roof at Third Street Pizza, and I just think it's great that you were there as yourself, but as a city manager too, and that's just a nice. Anybody owns a business and would have the city manager come be part of something, that's a big deal. So thank you for doing that. And it shows great support from the city and stuff. So I'm tickled, but it was a great event. I got heartburn from my brat, but
Was it your brat or your second brat that you got back?
it was the third one, man. And your pockets were full and you left too. I can't believe it.
I headed directly to the monk to help them celebrate their anniversary. So
It was a nice, very nice.
it was
event.
awesome. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning.
All right. Thank you very
Thank you for your
much.
time. Thank you for your attention. I'll try to have good questions for you next week.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna call Doris and find out for sure that she's really cooking you dinner. Okay.
She won't pick up.
She refused pizza. I mean, Mikey's pizza.
Thank you so much. And we would now invite our forest rep to give us a report. Mr. Brent Keller, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, we're continuing on with our sale program. Of course, the 300 401 road sale is a 2024 sale, but it's a 2-year contract, and Boise Cascade has indicated they're going to harvest that in 2025. So half of the estimated value of that will be due here end of July. Talked to them about that the other day, I remind them, and then the other half will be due end of January. So before they've even logged at all or anywhere near that, they will have paid for the entire sale. So we'll look forward to that one next year. The 550 road number 3 sales in full swing. I was out there today. Things are looking really good. They've got just a little bit of cutting left to do. That'll be complete this week. And the roads are in great shape. They're trucking every day and currently yarding with a large tower out there on one side of the sale. That was purchased by Stimson Lumber. Roughly 152 loads have been shipped to Stimson, other destinations. So estimated volume received to date that we've been paid for to date, 827,000 board feet, and estimated value paid to date is 548,354. In some years past, I've reported like what I estimate's actually been cut and valued as of right, like as we're speaking here versus what we've actually received, but then it can become confusing where if they're late on a payment, it can look like we've received more than we have. And so I'm just going to start strictly reporting on what we've received each month. So those are the real numbers. A lot of road work related to that sale. And that was mostly set up and done ahead of hauling and most of the operations. So most of the project work is done for that sale. Working with water and light staff on this Haskins culvert replacement. This is a major project to replace this culvert on where Haskins Creek, where the road crosses Haskins Creek near the treatment plant, below Link Dam. That I think was probably installed 50 years ago, maybe, or something. It's a very undersized pipe that needs to be replaced. So we're out with, it's permitted through and notified through ODF, but they work together with ODFW to get approval on a project like that. So I was out with ODF and ODFW. Typically, they want to see a structure installed that is to bank full width. So we did some measurements that'd be 30 feet wide and basically would kick you into a bridge. It'd be much more of an undertaking in terms of the permitting. It could take a year or something to get accomplished. So that's not practical with that road being related to utility and so they agreed to move from that ideal ecological design to what they describe as a hydrologic design. So the water will pass through and based on 100-year peak flow event, that's a 20-foot wide bottomless culvert. So it will be a pipe. It'll be like an arch culvert. So the bottom of that will mimic the stream conditions and allow the water to pass through and provide fish passage just the
So you
same.
set that on a foundation so it doesn't slip into the mud and stuff?
So it'll be on footings.
On footings, okay.
And that's all precast. That was one part of the permit that was important, that we weren't out there pouring concrete in the stream and stuff, so. So we had got approval from them to do that outside the in-stream work period. So we could do it like now or, but I think it's gonna line up to be in the stream period anyway, as far as I think they're manufacturing that now. It'll probably show up. That period is from like July 1 through September. And that's about when we're working on it anyway. So that's not a stumbling block either.
Is this part of the logging program? Have loggers do this or are we doing it ourselves?
It's being done by Emory, right, as part of that raw water line
Oh, okay.
project. So one thing to point out was the reason they were able to do this permitting through ODF, which is much more streamlined and simpler than like Corps of Engineers or another agency, was that it's considered a forest road because we haul through there and stuff. So that's lined up real well as far as getting this accomplished in timely, streamlined fashion. So
Brent, excuse me, what did we think we were gonna have to install when we first looked at this project?
I showed up like, well, we're doing a bridge. And I was told, no, I can't do a bridge. So within a few hours of talking to ODFW, we did the math quickly. A 20-foot culvert was going to be reality. You knew what was there. I think it's an eight footer. I think it was undersized. So. Sure.
So it's kind of getting into that. Originally, we were thinking 8 foot. That's what we came for, like out there. And we did on the 10, but that's when it went into 20 foot.
Okay.
So we're actually pushing for a replacement like for like, those are just the circular typical culverts.
And that was the 10-foot we had before.
It was an 8 foot.
8 foot, and there was an overflow culvert.
Yeah, then an overflow over on the side of it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
So James first said 8 foot. I first said bridge.
Right.
But the bridge, that was the original water like for like idea.
So is this as we come down and head to the treatment plant, drop into this?
Right as you cross it.
Right. So that should come off without a hitch in the timely fashions. Moving on to look at how these new rule changes affect the watershed. And when I did my annual review and budget proposal in December, I mentioned these new rules were coming. And it was requested by commission to just do a quick analysis. Okay, what are we losing in terms of available acres to the increased buffers? These new rules mostly affect buffer widths and operating on steep slopes. We don't have any steep slope issues in the watershed according to their model. And really, from what I know out there, we're operating on like the steepest slopes we have out there right now, and there was no issue there. So that won't affect us. A little bit of background, this private forest accord was like a compromise between the industry folks and environmental folks. They signed a charter, the idea being we increased some of these buffers and changed some rules to improve fish habitat in exchange for environmental groups moving away from ballot measures and litigation. And so we try to collaborate on coming to a common set of goals. So the resulting rules, you can see that resulted in increased buffers. So that this top table shows the old stream buffers, which are real simple, real basic. And then you see that second table shows the increased buffers. The one that jumps out to everybody is especially in the coast range, is non-fish perennial streams. So picture a stream, it's real steep that a fish wouldn't go up, but it's running water year round, required no buffer before. Well, now they require 50 feet each side for a large stretch of that. So it can be, you look back on the watershed operations over the years, you look at a lot of areas, like that 303 road sale last year, you could virtually not operate because there were a lot of little streams through it. But last year we were able to do it. This year you'd have a lot of buffers in there. So it's a change. That's the most glaring one. You see small fish stream buffers doubled in buffer size from 50 feet either side of the stream to 100 feet either side. And the non-fish perennials went from 0 to 50 to 75 feet either side, depending on how far they are from the fish stream and so on. So we quickly, in order to know exactly is it perennial or seasonal, you really have to survey the stream case by case basis. You got to go out there like late summer if there's no water in it. It's a seasonal stream, still running water at that time. You call it perennial. It doesn't really make sense. I don't know anybody that's really doing that property wide. They're usually doing it. Most timber companies are doing like the next year's harvest plan. They're surveying those streams and pinning that down. So we just made some assumptions. Like let's assume they're all perennial. Let's assume they're all seasonal of the non-fish ones. So the old buffers took up about 390 acres, or took out about 390 acres of available timber that was, harvestable. If we assume every stream out there is perennial and going to require increased buffers, it would go from 390 to 675. If none of them were perennial, you'd go from 390 to 486. So you would increase the buffer anywhere from 76 to 285 acres was our rough estimate. If you figure it's obviously somewhere in between there, and I just assumed, let's say it's 200 acres that we lose. Just a round number. It's probably not that much. So the outside would be 200 acres. And those buffers don't always they have a variable amount of volume, but let's figure they had 30,000 board feet per acre in the buffers. You think our average sale, just for reference, is probably about 40,000 of the acre. And some of the old, so like the 550, the one unit of the 550 was like 80 to 90,000 of the acre. But in general, they're average 40 to 50. So if we figured 30,000 board feet to the acre, we're losing 200 acres. And an average value of that volume is $500 per 1,000 board feet. We're losing with the buffers about $3 million worth of merchantable timber. But you're not losing that each year. That is the amount wrapped up in the buffers. So you look at that in perpetuity, it's not a lot over time.
Do you think this will be challenged, let's say 10 years from now? I mean, this is basically something that's happened and everybody got together and agreed on this, but I'm sure the timber operators, were kicking and flailing and.
Yeah, I think the idea is no one's sticking and flailing. These are the rules, so the
Maybe
environmental,
change in the future.
so the hope is that, the environmental groups couldn't sue or put out a ballot measure to ban logging.
It's a compromise.
And the loggers wouldn't all show up in Salem with log trucks and.
Like they've done before.
Yeah, so, I mean, I hope that it's one of those ideas where everybody's kind of, hoping this holds, but I think it was a good compromise for now, but.
So one question I have, dead or dying trees in the buffer, can we remove those? What's the? Do we have the ability to manage those buffers and?
See, and that's the thing, before we could go into the buffer, we never really did, but you could measure all the basal area in there. If you had a certain amount, you could go in and take the rest. You could take like 100-foot buffer, maybe you can go down to 50 if you had the basal area, which is the surface area volume in there, which you could do at will in the watershed because there's such big trees. But we didn't do a lot. We didn't chase that a lot. But yeah, you'd have to leave the dead and dying trees.
So that brings up the question of fire issues there.
We don't typically we don't have a lot of snags anywhere, and they're not a lot of them in the buffers, but.
So has there been any thought about potential wildfire issues with doing that?
With the increasing the buffers,
And the dead and dying trees in those buffers?
I don't know that it's as big an issue as the losing the volume. I don't think it's going to create as much concern with the fires.
More to come.
Right.
I have a question. How will you be monitoring this year to year? I mean, this is an assumption that you're presenting today. And so how will we be apprised of what you're learning in the field?
So I think I could report for instance, this year's sales were not unaffected. There was no perennial streams. There's the Haskins buffer went up 10 feet, which might seem like a lot, but it's virtually the same as 100 feet. That's not a big effect. We didn't have like a lot of non-fish perennial streams. That 550, the only water in the whole sale was Haskins, and we're only on one side of it. So it's just a small buffer change. So virtually a rounding error in terms of the overall amount. And the other sale, they'll log next year, same thing. There was one seasonal stream in it that doesn't require a buffer. So that's something I could report going forward year to year, like, okay, here's the sale for this year, and here's going back to the PFA, here's the PFA affected. We'll kind of learn as we go how much we're losing. But there'll be some, for sure.
So I think to help Jody with her question, don't you have legislative people employed at Mason Bruce just to deal with watching what's going on at the legislative stuff? I mean, you're a forester, so your job is really to take care of our forest, but you got people inside the office that are tuning into this.
Looking like more policy stuff, sure.
Yeah, so I think my memory is that you've got policy people who would catch this and.
So I wasn't thinking about that because
The role is
I was
set.
thinking, because I think not appropriately to say this, I think everybody was equally unhappy with the accord, which is, that's what you want,
Yeah.
right? You don't want anybody to win in this scenario, and it is what you said, it's to take the big P politics out of this and just let's get on with business, and we all mutually agree that we're, all uncomfortable at the same level. But my concern is that you've made an assumption, calculated with your expertise, but I guess not knowing what we don't know, and as you learn more, I don't know that I'm asking you to do that, to do more, but I would like to get a sense if something's percolating that's different than your assumption.
Okay, sure.
So that's kind of what, and that could be just a check-in or a statement at the annual discussion.
A year from now, did it change from today?
Yeah, I think we need to
My
get another.
assumption- The rules are gonna change, but did my assumption change?
That's
Sure.
right. So that, yeah, I don't think yeah, that's right. So just kind of a baseline assumption, just so we can kind of get a sense of where,
Okay,
and then with, climate change and all of that, how it may not be a thing, right? Like,
Right, I was wondering if you're gonna map the perennial streams, because I was wondering the same thing when you asked your 10-year question, Commissioner. I was thinking, well, some of those perennial streams might just be gone in 10 years as well.
Yeah.
Do you have a plan to do any mapping, or how are you gonna record where they are and those changes, which I think
Yeah.
ties in with Commissioner
I
Christensen?
think we're learning and the state's learning. I've had 2 sales and other properties already where it said it's a fish stream with water in it, or not a fish stream, but a perennial stream with water in it. To meet with the state guy, I said, there's no water in there. They come out and say, no, okay, yeah, we agree. They go back in their system and change that to a seasonal stream. So there'll be some of that learning over time. We're gonna map in our system as we go, as we learn, either confirming what the state says is there or not. I mean, you're seeing this with their steep slope mapping too, where they'll say this is a high danger area. And it seems like there's no soil movement, and then there's areas where I've seen big slides and that their model didn't show that as unstable at all. So there'll be some tweaking to this. Like this is kind of similar to what went on in Washington in like the early 90s. Yeah, they have a similar system where you can each year you submit, or each time you submit a permit application in Washington, you'll identify each stream and record things about it. But if it's not there, you can exit out and let them know, hey, that stream doesn't exist. They'll update their system, and so
It's ODFW, and are they fairly responsive?
it's ODF so far. Folks, I've heard a lot of folks frustrated about this. My 2 encounters with this so far have been great.
Right.
That they took care of it. We're willing to meet, so on.
So Brent, did I understand you correctly that you said one of our sales last year would have been greatly impacted by these new rules?
Mhm.
And how many acres, I know you haven't checked it, but rough, just a guess, how many acres of that sale would we have not been able to lock?
See, that one, so we will encounter this kind of thing, but that one was that was about 60 acres, and I think we would have probably lost about 20. You'd have lost a third of it probably.
So that's 10% of your total estimated loss of acres. Does that make sense? This was a really unique piece, or?
I think some of those buffers we were in as old buffers.
Oh, okay.
You know,
I misunderstood, because I thought the new rules cost you an additional, because so that you're not talking about how much we logged but couldn't have, you're talking about.
yeah, because of the new rules, it probably would have been like 10 or 15 acres out of that one, but that's a real extreme example. It's got, and that has a lot of.
I think that's a
Your
good,
clarifying question, though?
Will you finish your clarifying question? Because I want to make sure that I'm on the same page. You were
I
about to.
wanted to know whether if whatever number of acres is from one sale, it would have been prohibited in the new rules. If looking at that, the 200 acres really makes sense to you, that there's only 200 acres lost. And it's important to me, I think, because we want to plan ahead, and we want to also make sure we're doing sustained yield cutting.
Mhm.
So.
So I don't know that there's clarity on that. So the new rules would have cost the 303 sale approximately 20 acres. of harvest? Is that what you're saying?
That was that 303 road, which we decommissioned, should not be there. So we took it out because it was running right parallel to Haskins. So that was really satisfying project, to do that sale and then decommission that road, put that to bed. And now the streams all run, unencumbered by pipes. There were 10 pipes along that road. That's probably half a mile long. There's just a lot of, and Bill must have put this in for salvage years ago or, so that was like an extreme example of the impact of the new rules, what they would do.
And it was unique. In that situation was unique.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't occur
That'd be a
again.
reason to do what you suggested though and
Yeah.
follow up.
Yeah, I think moving forward, just so that we're not caught off guard.
Yeah, we may get into this, wait a minute, we're finding way more, it's more of an impact, and that's the kind of thing you're gonna.
Yeah,
hear about.
absolutely. That's what we want to know.
But next year, when you lay out the plan for us, you'll take into account that you've got these issues and, or your inventory, we pushed away from some of these spots.
Mhm.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Any additional comments?
I was just gonna quickly mention with fire season
Oh,
that
yes.
it's getting warmer, seems like fire season, but they have not declared it yet for our area, but the water and light fire trucks out there and ready. Bighorn's got their fire wagon on site at the job, so it's gonna happen, I would think, for sure before.
Commissioner, do you have a follow-up?
This is something that's totally different. But I think you've been here long enough. We had a picnic for years, we had a resident living at the dam in a house as a caretaker.
The house was there.
Yeah.
King, yeah.
And so we had a picnic there for our employees a lot of times, but I remember the last one, we had Paul Elias was our GM.
Been a while.
So as a kid, that was always a fun place to go and have a picnic, especially because the pools there at the culvert were full of fish. And I can remember my brother and I always getting ready, we're gonna get a fish, those fish have got so much food, that but that was a really neat thing, but I think, did we worry about security and as part of why we should, just too much to maintain?
We don't, the park's closed and been closed for a long time.
But I mean, it was a big deal. Do you ever see that we might want to resurrect it just as a nice touch for our community, or is it a risky thing?
It's a risk.
Okay, I'm just curious. Because it was a fun thing as a kid,
Especially wildfire,
Mhm.
when I would be worried about the most.
Mhm.
because I know there's always staff up there whenever we went up and had a picnic on the weekend, so.
The tables are still there, those
Yeah.
10-ton concrete tables.
It was a big deal when I was a kid, yeah.
That's cool.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Okay, we are now going to have a public hearing. It is 5:50 PM on June 18th, 2024. This public hearing was scheduled for 5 PM. I'm going to open the public hearing on McMinnville Water and Lights Integrated Resource Plan for Electricity. I'm the presiding officer and will conduct the hearing, impose reasonable time limits on participants, and receive documents and reports into the hearing record. At today's hearing, the commission expects to begin each with the staff report. During the staff report, I may recognize other members of the commission to ask questions of staff. After the staff report, interested parties will be invited to ask questions. Before stating your question, please state your name and address for the record. We are operating in a hybrid digital format on Zoom. If you're watching on YouTube, you will need to go to the Zoom meeting as provided in the published notices and on the website in order to join the meeting. Anyone joining the Zoom meeting is automatically set to be on mute and to have their video display hidden. At the appropriate times during the meeting, I'll ask those on Zoom whether they would like to speak. When this occurs, please select the raise hand option from your device. When you have selected raise hand, the staff person managing the meeting will know that you'd like to ask a question. Do we have anyone on Zoom? Just out of curiosity? Okay. Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone on the phone?
We do not.
Okay. After the staff report, the commission anticipates accepting materials into the hearing record and continuing the hearing to July 16th, 2024 for comments of interested parties, a final staff report, deliberations of the commission, and consideration to adopt the plan. To begin, I would like to Invite our Power Resource Manager, Ms. Jamie Phillips, to begin the staff presentation and introduce our plan consultant.
Good evening.
Good evening.
For the record, my name is Jamie Phillips. I serve as the Power Resource Manager for McMinnville Water and Light. Last August 2023, after a formal solicitation process, the commission authorized staff to engage with EES Consulting to develop an integrated resource plan. The IRP serves as a tool for power resource planning by evaluating viable resource options that will economically, reliably, and responsibly meet McMinnville's electric load needs. The team at EES Consulting is both regionally and nationally recognized for their substantial experience and expertise in the areas of integrated resource planning, power supply procurement, conservation, potential assessment, and cost of service and rate design. They offer extensive knowledge and understanding of BPA products, rates, and contracts, as well as the variety of power and transmission initiatives and challenges currently facing our region. McMinnville staff has been pleased to partner with EES Consulting on this effort. Joining us this evening are Leah Fisher and Garrett Cole, who will share the draft integrated resource plan.
Wonderful. Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Fisher, Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Jamie, and good evening, everyone. We're very pleased to be here. As Jamie mentioned, I'm Leah Fisher, and I'm here with my colleague Garrett Cole. Happy to be with you this evening. And you can see before you sort of what we're set out to do over the next 45 minutes to an hour. It looks like a little bit of alphabet soup here, but I hope as we walk through, we can give you a better sense of how we approach this integrated resource plan and ultimately what we concluded. So sort of our summary of the results of these different portfolios that we evaluated. And so we'll get into some of the details and terminology here shortly, but I just wanted to give you a sense of overall what we're after here this evening is to really help you understand our process and then what we concluded as far as integrated resource planning for McMinnville. And let's see if I can get this to you. There we go. All right. So just to give you a little bit more of a sense of what integrated resource planning is, this may be a term that's familiar to some, but not all. So I think it's always helpful just to set the stage. What are we talking about here? Integrated resource planning really at its heart is a strategy for long-term resource planning to meet customer energy needs. So an integrated resource plan is looking at the needs that you have today and the resources that you have today, and then considering looking at future loads, what additional resources you may need. And this is looking at long-term load forecasting. It's also looking at regulatory requirements, state policy, and any other requirements a utility may have for its specific operations and service territory. So we're looking at things like supply side resources. So those are resources you kind of think about traditionally as far as like a solar PPA, a power contract, or a wind resource. Those are supply side resources. But it also looks at demand side resources. So things like energy efficiency. And that's what integrated resource planning is. So that term integrated is demand side and supply side resources being considered together as a whole. So one of the big things that happens in this whole process, of course, as you can imagine, is we're looking at different resources and their costs. That's a really big piece of this. But in addition to that, there's a lot of qualitative components that must also be factored into these considerations around resources. So we'll get into a lot of those this evening. One in particular that does come into play for McMinnville is considerations around transmission deliverability and availability. So we're going to talk about that because when you think about a resource, you can't just think about it as itself. You know, what is the cost and what is the technology maturity? You also have to think about, do I have the ability to bring that resource to my service territory? And as we'll get into, there's a lot of complexity right now in the region around questions around transmission, deliverability, and availability. And I think lastly, I would leave you just for this stage setting slide. It's important to remember that an integrated resource plan is not meant to actually prescribe resource related decisions. So this document, while it would be nice if it was, here are the specific resources that you should go out and pursue, and this plan tells you how to go out and do that. It's not really what it's meant to do. It's really supposed to give you a best assessment directionally of a resource mix that could best fit your needs. But as I'll get into just here in the next few slides, there's a lot of uncertainty in planning. And so it always is by its nature, a snapshot in time. And so you can think of it as a set of options that can best meet your needs at this point in time, but it can't really be used as a tool to go forth and make a decision here tomorrow, the next day. It has to continually be updated over time as conditions change. So that's sort of our groundwork on what integrated resource planning is. And now I just want to spend a few minutes just talking a little bit about what's happening in the region and some of the complexities that are presenting for McMinnville and other utilities. So here in the West, we have a scenario where there's a lot of resource retirements going around. We're thinking about baseload generation resources, and that's because of a lot of environmental policy, but also economic factors. So some of your traditional resources in the region, carbon resources are being retired and they're being replaced by wind and solar resources. So these are intermittent renewable resources. And while these are following policies, and so of course, right, this is not a bad thing, but it does enhance concerns around grid reliability. And there's sort of a double-edged sword happening here in the West, in that not only do we have resources that have traditionally been very reliable baseload resources retiring, we're also seeing challenges in terms of transmission build out. There hasn't been a lot of transmission build out in the region for a really long time. And so now we're seeing not only sort of challenges from a reliability standpoint due to renewable resources and less baseload, but we also don't have the transmission to bring those new resources to load. So there's that challenge that presents itself out here in the West. There's also some interesting new initiatives that are happening, things like the Western Resource Adequacy Program. So this is a voluntary program for utilities to participate in, where there's capacity requirements that must be met. And that's obviously for this overall goal of becoming more reliable in the region, but it certainly puts a higher value on capacity rich resources, and also puts more competition for those resources. At the same time, there's a lot of discussions right now about a voluntary day-ahead market in the West. That is something that Bonneville is considering participating in. A lot of other utilities are considering participating in. And why I mention it is that it really does sort of upend the status quo of how our region relies on serving load and how Bonneville engages with customers. And there potentially are a lot of benefits to something like a day-ahead market, but it just adds a layer of uncertainty as far as how customers' needs are met today and what it might look like in the future. And lastly, oh, please, yes.
So you might explain what capacity means?
Oh, sure. So if you're thinking about a resource and how it meets electricity needs, you can think about it both in terms of energy, and then you can think about it in terms of capacity. So capacity is what is the total amount that this resource could provide if it could operate the most efficiently 24/7 and always provide the exact perfect amount that it's able to actually produce. And then energy is what actually happens when all of the other complexities that are involved in transmitting that energy actually play out. So that's kind of maybe a best simple way I can think to explain it. But thanks, that's a good question.
I don't know if this is the right time, so if you want to come back to this, but in addition to this voluntary day ahead market, what about just the kind of general opening up of the market? I know that we talked a lot about some of the congestion pricing that we faced when we were having storms, and part of that was just a lack of being able to access energy produced in other areas, but it was regulatory or just market?
It was the Cal ISO, it was their congestion pricing.
Yeah, so it was just the market that was limiting the resource that could have been
It
shared.
was actually the
Okay.
limiting factor was the transmission. Because we didn't have transmission capacity to deliver. So that's why you end up with congestion pricing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic when you think about markets kind of holistically in our region, and we're unique, right? Like, we don't have an RTO ISO, we don't have this framework where the transmission that's needed to get resources to different load pockets efficiently just happens because we have the system set up that way. We don't here because we're outside of an RTO ISO. And so you do run into things like transmission constraints and congestion pricing. So things like a day ahead market, I think are trying to solve in part some of those challenges. They're one step forward. They don't go as far as, being part of the full, regional transmission operation. But they do take a step.
And remember, what's happening in the market now is the load centers are on the west side of the Cascade, and the generation is now being built on the east side, and black here is the transmission to get it to the load centers. So that's really what's constraining development here.
John, the look ahead, day ahead thing, Cascade still does maintenance on Thursdays.
It's
Or what-
Fridays,
or Friday?
they're down Friday through Sunday evening, right?
Friday afternoon.
So we have a tremendous amount of load available. Is that the kind of thing that you would forecast and say,
Well,
or is it already in?
well, here's the problem with that. Those are mostly light load hours, or not heavy load hours. So there's
Oh,
for off peak. So
okay.
So heavy load hours are, Monday through Saturday, 7 AM to 10 PM. Off peak is everything else. And so when they're down like that, those are off peak hours.
I have another question that might be out of place here, so apologize if it is. But when you were opening up and you were talking about the intermittent resource and the fact that that's producing this big challenge right now, and in the future, I see that conflict between trying to have a resource that has a lower environmental impact or potential impact than so many of our other ways of producing this energy. And I also know that there's a lot of conflict about offshore wind, et cetera, but which would still be intermittent resource. That's a long way of asking, are there conversations happening, or is there policy pointing at, or innovation leading towards some sort of wave development? I mean, I know it exists, but I'm curious why we're trying to wean ourselves off of one type of energy, and the big problem is the intermittent nature. And we have this entire coastline, and at least my entire life, the way the tide comes in and the tide goes out. And I think that's the way it's going to always happen. So are there outside forces pushing us towards green, if you will, resources that aren't intermittent, like wave technology?
Yeah, I mean, as far as wave technology goes, and I think there might have been a section in supply side resources where we touch on that, but I think the challenge with a lot of those resources is just where they are in their development stage and the pricing associated with them. They're just not, when we're assessing them across other resources, they can't really compete from a cost standpoint yet, just based on where that technology is. So I don't know if you have any more details on wave technology you'd share, but I think those continue to progress. And I think all of the resources that don't rise to the level of being cost effective yet, we include them there because it does shift and change over time. So they are things to keep an eye on. But yeah, they can't compete usually from a cost standpoint.
Yeah, I think just the life cycle and maturity for resources like that aren't yet in the mainstream in terms of our ability to participate at effective cost, just things.
And then I think the other challenge is you still have to get it.
You still have to transmit.
Yeah,
don't
and
transmit.
the Oregon coast has very limited transmission capacity.
But one of the ways, and we get into this in some of the portfolios that we talk about, but one of the ways you can try to help those intermittent resources is with battery storage. And that can be a way where you can accomplish that oftentimes.
That has its own impact.
Right.
Okay.
And battery storage is short term, it's not long-term capacity.
Yes.
That's a challenge with it yet, and I think it's probably quite a ways out too.
Yeah.
And you still have to charge the
Yeah.
batteries.
No, those are great questions.
Yeah, great questions. I think we mostly got through this one. The last one I would mention is Bonneville is currently in the process with customers to develop the new contracts for the 20-year time period. They call these the provider of choice contracts, and there's a draft policy out that outlines kind of the broad parameters of what these contracts will look like, the products that they'll offer. But I will say, you know, even after that policy came out and we saw, and here's going to be the load following, here's going to be the slice block, and you know, now things are still in flux. Now that they're in this contract development stage, and you know, questions about whether or not they're going to continue to offer the slice product are still out there, and that's a really big deal. So I know you all are load following, so that particular issue maybe wouldn't directly impact you as much as the slice block customer, but all of these things are kind of just impacting the planning environment because there's just a lot of uncertainty around how Bonneville is going to provide these resources to customers. And so all that to point out that it's a really complicated time to be planning. And so in fact, it's probably a really good time to do an integrated resource plan, because I think the more complexity is out there, the more need there is to try to hone in on how it impacts you and what your options are in the future.
Just a quick reference to the product she's noting, load following is all of your needs. It covers all of your needs for both energy and capacity at times of peak. And that's a really conservative product to be able to take in an environment where there is so much uncertainty. So we'll bring this to you here towards the end of the presentation regarding next steps or recommendations. But that load following product and placing that responsibility on the larger Bonneville Power Administration to handle for us certainly gives us a level of confidence or conservatism around knowing that our needs will be met going forward in the future. So we'll contrast that with some other resource considerations just to demonstrate the alternatives we've looked at.
So this last slide, I would just note that oftentimes in an integrated resource plan, one of the things that you are factoring into considerations for resources are specific regulatory requirements. RPS standards, so those are renewable portfolio standards. Some states have specific requirements to complete an integrated resource plan. And so sometimes there's specific components that must be included in the integrated resource plan as a result of those laws. For McMinnville, there are currently no requirements in Oregon for consumer-owned electric utilities to complete an IRP. So what you are doing here is great, it's best practices. There's no requirement in law for you to do it. And as far as the Oregon RPS, that renewable portfolio standard, today you are not subject to that standard. By 2025, smaller utilities, so those with less than 3% of all state load, and also those with less than 1.5%, there are some small requirements there. So a 10% requirement and then a 5% requirement. Looking at the high load growth scenario that we've all evaluated for McMinnville, by 2025, you're at about 1.4% of total state load. So would not be subject yet, but things could change depending on how those loads come out.
Quick question. I remember when this first came out, old hydro didn't count. Is that still true?
Yeah, they call it large hydro.
Yeah, so there are, I think that's correct. I'm thinking also about the Bonneville contract, and I think there are some exceptions for hydro through the Bonneville contract, but yeah, I think you would have to have specific upgrades to your hydro resources for it to qualify, if I remember correctly.
Some of our power from Bonneville is renewable, right? At least under our current contracts, like we have some wind power, but how will we know whether, I guess we figure it out later, but what are they talking about doing about large hydro or existing hydro or whatever as being part of your renewable portfolio?
Yeah, I think large hydro, unless there's been specific upgrades to the facilities, don't qualify as renewable resources.
Okay, are they, and wasn't there some discussion about changing that?
I might have to follow up on that. I'm not aware.
Is the differentiation that it's been deemed essentially fish friendly? Is that when it?
That's generally sort of,
Okay.
the policy reason for that, yeah.
And do we know which Bonneville dams are?
Well, I think the
Yes.
way that they have tried to kind of parse it for utility compliance for utilities that have Bonneville contracts is just higher level. I don't think they're doing it on like a a dam by dam basis. I think it's just generally that contract that you have. And there are some specific areas in the contract where they've noted exceptions. So where it would still qualify for under the RPS. And I'm trying to see if I had those in any of my notes here. We might have to follow up with the specifics there, but there is specific language around how that Bonneville contract works.
Okay, and
with the
we
RPS.
don't need it for a while, so we'll need it relatively soon, so it looks like, depending on how fast the
Right,
rest
and you
of the
can
state
use
goes.
Rex also
Right,
to
we have-
comply, and I know that you all have a fair amount of Rex banked. I think it's 823,000 Rex banked for future compliance, so I think you all, maybe the big picture here is I think you all are pretty set for some time.
Okay,
And probably not something you need to worry about even beyond 2025 for quite some time.
Do you mind adding a little context to quite some time? 1 to 3, 5 to 10?
Well, we weren't looking specifically to answer the question of when you would be subject to the RPS, so I don't have that number at hand. We were just trying to make sure that you didn't have any requirements in 2025 that we would want to make sure we factor in. So I'm sure we could look and try to get that number if that's something that you all really were wanting to see. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure you didn't have anything coming up for this compliance period.
And that was under the high growth scenario,
Yes, under the
Yeah.
high growth scenario.
which would be 2%. What's the?
Yeah, so that's the one where you are growing, I think it's 2% as opposed to 0.6%. Yeah. And actually, I think I'm remembering too, I can double check and send a note to confirm, but I think it might have been 2043 is like, yeah, because I think we were playing around with that at one point, but I didn't want to.
That feels more comfortable with
Yeah.
1 to
and
2
if
years.
the state load goes faster than our load, or the same speed as our load,
Right.
we're still at 1.4, right?
Or less.
Or less.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to transition a little bit and talk a little bit about loads and the load resource balance. So load resource balance just means how your loads match up with your resources today. Okay, so first fun chart to show. So when you take a look at this, I think it's probably pretty straightforward to see what it's showing, but let me just walk through it here a bit. So you can see your historical load growth from 2012 through 2023. So that's that black line. And then you can see the two different load growth assumptions. So two different load forecasts that we did. So we did a base forecast. So that's just the gray projected line, and that's showing your historical actual loads and growth by rate class, considers weather and seasonal shape by rate class. But then we also did an additional forecast that looks at high housing growth and also some electric vehicle load expansion. And so that's your higher projected growth scenario. So you can kind of see how those both play out over time. I think it's 0.2% per year under the base case forecast and 0.6% per year under the high growth scenario forecast. So that is the trajectory that we see in doing this analysis for you all. And I think the next slide, let's keep moving forward. Next slide helps you see what that looks like, that those two different load growth scenarios stacked up against your resources. And sort of the upshot of this slide is that across both of those cases, the base case and high load growth scenario, you start seeing a resource need, and we call this above contract high watermark, ACHWM. I know that's a mouthful, but it just means that it is need that you have that goes beyond your Bonneville Tier 1 allocation. So that's the BPA Tier 1 bar that you see there. And so you start seeing that need right away here in 2024 and through 2044. So that's the 20-year period we looked at. And that's about 8.2 average megawatts annually. So let me try to help break it down a little bit more. So when we're talking about Bonneville Tier 1, Tier 2, I don't want to assume everybody knows what that means, but basically what Bonneville does is they have this tiered rate methodology. So they use that to charge utility customers for the wholesale electric power that they provide. And there are basically two tiers in this rate design, Tier 1 and Tier 2. And tier one is, you're generally speaking, the lowest cost rate, and it's based on the amount of power the federal system can produce. So those are all the resources in Bonneville's system at a cost-based rate. And so they call this contract high water mark, which is basically every utility's allocation of the system at this tier one rate. And so you can see your Bonneville tier one meets a lot of your resource need over all of these different time periods. Your McMinnville resources in the gray bar, that's everything that you have contracts wise on top of Bonneville tier one. So that's making up some of the difference. And then where you see that tier two energy. So we use the term tier two. So that's kind of, you know, the higher tier that you would have to pay for Bonneville. But for purposes of what we're studying here, that is actually kind of your gap. So you can either use Bonneville tier two to meet that gap. And that's a reasonable approach to potentially take. We'll talk about how that shakes out in these portfolios we looked at. But you can also choose to pursue your own resources. But in Bonneville speak, they call those non-federal resources. So it's your own resources. So just when you look at that yellow golden bar, that's where your resource need is in this picture. Yeah.
So first, for staff, I guess, I have the impression that we had some more tier one headroom left and we wouldn't be out of it this year.
That's correct, right?
That's correct.
We have 2.4 megawatts going into the next contract.
Yeah.
Mm,
Assumptions are.
228.
Yeah, so our assumptions here in 2028 start relying on the estimates for your contract high water mark in the current, or I should say the upcoming contracts, the new contracts.
Okay, I understand that, but you show us in tier two for the 3 years until then too.
Yes, that's what our study shows. So there may be something we need to
We
true
staff-
up or we can talk about, but yeah, that's what our study showed.
And
Is that, but that's based on the high growth scenario, right?
So you can see high growth and the regular loads, that's the black. So I think it's under both.
Was the additional, I felt like there was conversation around this movement with the addition of the smokestacks on the steel mill. I thought we talked about whether or not that was gonna
Potential.
push us up into tier two.
There's potential growth there, which we don't know, which hasn't been confirmed, right? They have not committed to that growth yet. But you also see in 2028 that we actually are tier one drops in 29.
Yeah.
Because our,
Consistent with the new contract.
yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we're actually losing some of our tier one in 29.
and then
Starting
does,
this contract.
does our Grant County power, is that included in the BPA tier one?
No, so that's in the gray bar.
Grant County goes away in 2029?
Okay.
No, so that is WMRE, so the landfill gas, that one goes away in 2030. So that's where you see the drop off. And I think maybe the Grant County, even though that's in your exhibit A, it's not included here because it's not used to serve.
It's
Direct
supposed
load.
to serve load, but we,
Not directly, right? Yeah.
right, so we designate that resource to BPA to roll into their portfolio and then serve us from the FCRPS in and we purchase a secondary crediting service to reconcile the differences.
So does that change your chart? That information?
No, because it's a pass through. What I just heard, is that right? Grant County goes here and then we get from Bonneville.
Yeah.
It goes to Bonneville, so it's a pass through.
So the
That's
only,
not
the only
something-
change is Riverbend there.
So
Yes.
So-
Sorry.
That's
Commissioner
probably
Tankersley
fair to
first.
say. The only change there is Riverbend, yes.
So Grant County is not included in our gray bar?
No, just for the reason that she
Okay.
articulated, it's basically you can do it like a pass through.
So the gray bar is solely Riverbend?
But we could theoretically, it's possible in the next contract, we could take that power, right?
take Riverbend
The Grant County part.
we could, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes into our portfolio now.
It's
just the way it goes.
As an existing resource.
But it diminishes, I think, every year. Isn't there a slight fraction of the less contract we had, we end up with less?
We end up with less in the last contract negotiation with Grant, I believe.
We won't know post 2028 what those declaration parameters are for exhibit A until next year.
Because don't they actually have authority to tell us to go away now? We had conflict with them last time trying to negotiate.
My
isn't it
recollection, we had some limitations on.
Yeah,
That they could reduce us, but there were limitations on how much they could, but that was a long time ago.
And it seems to me that it's 1 for 1, so whether it's gray or red, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's still the same, it's
It's
just
still-
how we receive it.
I
Either
guess the
we,
easiest, maybe the easiest way to explain it, it's part of our tier 1.
yeah, that's what.
Well, that was my question, and the answer was no, it's not, I thought.
Well, I think it's probably fair to say it based on the conversation that we've had. I think it's okay to characterize it that way. I just wasn't thinking of it, I guess, as your strict Bonneville tier 1 allocation in the way that we would normally think about it, but I think it's fair to describe it that way.
And I think for purposes of just, so memorializing the conversation, it might be good to put in a footnote of some sort. And I think your report is final, but I think what we're really trying to do is make sure that we're memorializing the history of the work that we're doing. And so that when someone comes in, they can read it and they can see what it means. Because if we didn't put that footnote in, right?
Yeah.
Tom would be making it a point every year.
And you're saying each year I'd forget what the answer was.
No, but I think we need to
Yeah.
make sure that,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Sherry, you had something you were gonna add a while ago.
I was just gonna ask about the 2029, because you said there's a decrease in tier 1, but then it's back up the following year, so I was just wondering why.
You want to explain that, Jamie? You want me to? So the dip is because that's the start of the new contract and our base allocation is going down. From bottom up.
For just that.
Well, because we lost load.
So,
We're losing our headroom. Right now we have headroom and then we're going to be losing that in the next contract.
we're gonna be able to get less tier 1. And so why
Why
do
is it-
we have why doesn't that reflect going forward then the less tier 1?
I think it does.
Does reflect it.
It's flat.
It's flat.
That's what.
Is my eyesight is bad?
No, it looks like.
It appears to move.
That red bar includes Grant
Seems-
County,
Right.
that's 2.9.
Well, is it because?
So,
Right here, it goes down and then it comes back up
and then it stays flat.
and then it stays flat.
Is it because we lose the landfill? Power at that time, then our tier 1 goes up, we hope.
We
lose it.
Well, the contract's over then, isn't it? The landfill contract?
it goes away. And
Yeah.
We're not taking it to load right now.
I know, but
Oh,
it's shown our.
It's showing as a resource we could use.
But.
until 29.
Didn't we talk about when the landfill gas went away, we were hoping to negotiate that our tier 1 would go up proportionally, they're not gonna punish us for having that resource.
Remains to be.
Yeah, that's part of the contract negotiations going forward,
Right.
because we don't know what they're gonna do. Because right now it's a dedicated resource. So. Essentially, right now, it takes away from the tier 1.
Riverbend does.
So that,
Oh, I see.
so
So,
that doesn't reflect,
Yeah, they account for all of your resources and figuring out how much of that tier 1 you get.
I see. So it's dipping in 29, but it's course correcting in 30.
that's
Is
the
that, am I
question.
reading that right?
That's the question.
So there's a lot of uncertainty going on right now. That's the problem.
So are we right in assuming that 2030 is speculation?
Well,
And
I
we're
think,
just looking through 29.
yes, so
Okay.
yes, we have to assume right now until those contract high water marks are finalized, I think that's like end of 2026. It's all kind of, Bonneville has given us estimates of what all of the different utilities in the region's contract high water mark might be. But that's still subject to change. And then there's also these different, this is kind of what I think we're talking about with the landfill gas. There's these different adjustments that can also impact your contract high water mark that some utilities may or may not be able to take advantage of. And all of that is still a little bit in flux as well. So,
So
yeah.
it's not, these aren't true, right? After 29, it's not true. Because we
but
don't have all the
I
information.
still haven't heard the explanation to Kathy's question as to why it appears to dip and then goes back up.
Maybe we can check on that. I don't think it's supposed to dip, so maybe if it's just how it's coming apart on the chart, but
And then-
yeah, we're
It could be
assuming
my
the same
eye-
contract.
could be my
high water.
eyesight as well.
No, it's definitely different.
And then,
Can I also ask a question, though, if we weren't taking, that we weren't using from the landfill currently from now through 2029, or from now when we get our new contract, would that affect our high water mark and what we might be able to get for tier 1 in 29 going forward? Like we're offsetting what we're taking, so our use looks lower, but are they looking at that?
speak to that one, Jamie?
Sorry. Right, so BPA looks at our total retail load, and then they reduce that by our dedicated resources and new large single loads to get our net requirement, and that is what is eligible to be served at from the federal system. And then they allocate the system, and you may or may not get all of your net requirements from tier 1. So currently, our net requirement is net of the Riverman resource. So our tier 1, they subtract out, or I mean, I'm sorry, our existing resources, which is Grant County. In the next contract, Riverman will become an existing resource and be subtracted from retail to get our. So we will see, BPA will, at this time, the plan is that our total retail load will be reduced by 4 average megawatts, which is the amount that we're moving to get our net requirement. BPA is proposing an adjustment for that new resource deduction of 50%, so we would get back to water. But the net effect is that our net requirement our tier 1 eligibility is in the next contract.
That's what he
So it could be too higher if Riverman wasn't in the picture.
If that's true,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of other considerations around the moving resource.
Yeah.
Right. If there's an advantage to having it.
There's a lot of moving parts in this next contract.
Got it.
Are gonna really affect our high water mark.
Yeah.
but we looked at it and it doesn't make sense to sell our Riverbanks contract this method.
And we plan to look into that closer and weigh the pros and cons once we have a little more information from EPA on how that would be treated. Removing a resource is not an easy thing to get done. I don't even know if we can do that.
Okay, thank
And
you.
then the implications of it are unfolding.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so this next one, this is just getting more granular into this load resource balance outlook. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because I want to make sure Garrett has a chance to get into some of these supply side resources and the portfolios. But this just gives you a better sense of like, if we're just, moving away from annual and we're trying to look at seasons, how do things shape up for McMinnville based on your loads? And you can see in winter and spring, that's where you have the most load and resource need. And then summer and fall, you can see that your resources track a little bit better with the load. And so there's less need there. And why that matters, and as far as resource planning goes, is because we take that into consideration when we're thinking about different resources and how they best meet your net load needs. And so there's different resources that are gonna obviously produce more in the summer. You can think about solar and other wind resources that are gonna produce more in seasons like winter and spring. Thinking about wind there, but those are just two examples, because they're relevant to what we looked at for McMinnville. So I just wanted to show these pictures as well, so you can kind of see how things shake out on a seasonal basis.
Real quick question, does this mean that our load is more than our resources in spring and fall? I'm just trying to understand the graphs.
Ask that one more time.
Well, the line that shows what our load is seems to be higher than our resources in everything except for summer.
Yeah, so this is looking on an hourly basis. So like when we show you the annual picture, right, you can see like, okay, over a year, here's how much need I have. But what this is showing is that on most hours in the winter and spring, you're gonna have some needs that you have to go out to market for.
Okay, great.
Whereas in these other months, you're not seeing that as much or often.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So now we can start talking a little bit more about some of the supply side resources and portfolios, and I'm gonna take a break and let Garrett pick up here for a little bit.
Okay, so in our IRP, integrated resource planning efforts like these, we take a careful look at the different types of resources. Take a different look at the various resources that might fit into our need, potentially offset some of that tier 2 consideration in the future, and think about, okay, how might any of these resources best fit going forward. We start with a larger list like what you're looking at here, and of course whittle that down to more appropriate resources that might fit our renewable need in the future. A thought about, clean energy, a thought about how those fit with load, likelihood to be considered. So we start with a broader list like this with cost estimates, and move into the next side where we summarize the overall screened and levelized costs of these resources. We also take into account that not all of these resources produce in the same shape. And so given that, there are different, there's RSS listed here in gray, which helps to essentially bring these resources to the same basis on a levelized cost basis from a comparison standpoint. And we also add some carbon costs, societal carbon cost, and estimate how much would we assign to certain resources, market or gas fired for that cost of carbon.
When you say shape, can you explain that?
Sure. So you're getting for a particular wind resource might only give you of its total nameplate ability to produce. It might only produce, say 27% of that in terms of a energy shape of its total capability. Whereas, you might have a larger hydro project that produces at a much higher percentage of its overall, capacity. And so one of the things that we do when we look at these resources and levelized costs is we're very much thinking about, we need to provide Bonneville the shape of resource that they're asking for in total generation. And not all of these resources produce at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to have a way to make those look similar. And this RSS component is essentially how we do that, providing additional market supply to cause it to look like a resource that Bonneville can use.
And those, the RSS costs are based on Bonneville numbers that they put out for their RSS costs.
What's
basically.
RSS stand for again?
Resource shaping service.
Yeah, resource shaping.
Basically, Bonneville says it costs us money to basically flatten out these renewables. This is how much it costs. And so when we're thinking about these resources, we know that they would charge you those RSS costs. So we add them on top of the resource cost so that it makes sense.
Can I ask you, back to the first screen, you show a bunch of fuel-oriented generation. I mean, are they being permitted at all now? I mean, I thought that was on the out.
Yeah,
About coal and gas and fuel.
Well, yes, what we're showing here are gas fired
Just
resources
strictly
only.
gas, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
Can you permit the gas fired resources days?
yeah, there's much more restriction in doing so, much more restriction on how much time it can run, even of its total capability.
Okay. I was under the impression we were something we couldn't be citing those because of all kinds of problems, so, which it deals with their efficiency eventually. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. And in addition to those sort of economic factors for resources that could be considered, we also have a variety of key qualitative factors. If we were thinking, for example, and we'll talk more about the resource types that are alternatives in our portfolios here in this resource plan. But wind, for example, how available is it at the sizes that we might need is a real interesting question. We're gonna look at considerations here for how it might fit, but it requires you to work with others in order to get that particular size that you need. I'm also thinking a little bit about transmission constraints, which we'll show you here in a moment. We started off with some of that as well. Deliverability of such resources as alternatives to tier 2 supply from Bonneville can also become a key qualitative factor that's difficult to overcome. So I think it's important to recognize that we can take our best shot at evaluating in a resource plan what are other alternatives, and we think that's worthwhile. If for nothing else, as you're thinking down in the future, hey, what might be resources that fit well? Who are my other parties that we might work with to look at resources like this? How do we position ourselves for that? But there are some key challenges or constraints here that would make it more difficult to consider those now.
Is Bonneville, their charter, are they restricted to strictly receiving the generation off the dams? Could they own, it takes a BLM land and own 5,000 acres of wind power? Or are they restricted from owning anything like that?
No, I mean, I guess I wouldn't profess to be the expert on like all of the legal factors there, but I do know that there are resources that they own and contract for. So there's wind, there's CGS. And I know they talked about in their resource plans, you know, how to grow the tier 1 system. So there are opportunities to continue to build the federal system.
Okay, first requirement is energy efficiency. That's what they're supposed to look at first for these stations.
And, when we say load following, I mean, Bonneville does have a requirement to meet the total requirements for certain utilities. And in so doing, has to consider these expansion of system resources in order to do it in the future.
But it isn't right now the biggest challenge for them, the transmission. So no matter what they're developing, they still have to move it for them.
Yeah, that's a great segue right there to transmission queue concerns. Well done. We are seeing in only 6 years from 17 to 23 over 12 times the number of generation interconnection requests in such a short period. This is largely renewable or battery storage as well. If you see, this is just the number of increasing requests for the use of the transmission system for various resources. And these are interconnection requests that are in progress. If you look at sort of the breakdown of those transmission requests in the study, you got nearly 16,000 megawatts in the overall Bonneville transmission cluster study here. And you can see pretty clearly wind and storage, wind, solar storage, wind, storage, solar and storage. Like it's each machination of renewable supply that makes up the predominant portion of this chart. A small 787 megawatts of hydro. The rest is resources related to kind of 75,000 megawatts there. So it's pretty interesting to look at this. This is not just in this region.
Can I ask you about the Paso LADW? Is that LA Cal so far in the water power?
Yeah.
We're getting some power from them.
This is the overall transmission cluster study.
Oh, okay.
So this is, the
Taking power or taking from the Northwest.
Yeah, and this is, the study of resources coming
Okay.
important in that direction. So I think it's interesting to look at that because you can get a pretty quick sense. Hey, we're in a constrained system, a lot of resources trying to come on here and pretty significant challenge associated with the delivery.
So there's huge growth going on in Wyoming right now. They finally got over the permitting hump. And there was a 60 Minutes, it was actually rerun, but where is all that energy gonna end up? Is that gonna end up in the Midwest or is it gonna, it won't flow transmission here? No, building in here. Oh, goodness
Have you
gracious.
heard anything about private development of transmission? You know, I mean, that's kind of like that whole internet world. I mean, there was a huge shift and everything broke loose when private companies started building, you know, international connections and building stuff. Could that happen in the electric world?
It could, but the problem is permitting. So there is a line that's actually been in the process for 15 years now. It's called P2H, Boardman to Hemingway,
Yeah.
500 kV.
Oh, interesting.
Still doesn't have its permits. All its
So,
permits yet.
but is it
It's
at
private.
the government, is that a discussion that's happening at the federal level a lot
Yes.
about that whole process of making that
Yeah,
available,
there's-
making that easy to do?
There's a push for permitting, but then there are lots of pushes back, but I think NWPPA, and I think APPA as well are both having legislative efforts on that. That are attempting to convince the representatives and senators
Yeah.
that we need this, and my feeling is that at some point there will be a lot of pressure from all sorts of constituents, not just power customers, because businesses will need it, cities will need it. So hopefully, but it's gonna take a long time because there are other things that, there are the environmental questions and people say, no, why don't, we agree you should have this, but we don't want to sacrifice the environment or I don't want this to go through my countryside. Those are big ugly towers, so.
I kind of feel like there's two things happening here. We're learning about what our resources are and what that recommendation, but there's also a strategic, potentially legislative component to this work. But I want to make sure that we're kind of focusing our energy in the right space, because that's a whole session right there just to talk about where, and I'm not sure.
No pun intended.
No pun intended, but I think that, yeah, I want to make sure that we're focused on what we need to today, but keep that in mind moving forward, because we're gonna have something there.
The 15,000, what was 500 megawatts you're talking about, the Hemingway? 500 kV. Does that have the same vulnerability that the Canadian gas pipe did, start a construction and then new administration comes in, shoots it down? I mean, are they at risk? So there we are. I mean, we can plan all we want in some political situation.
Well, on that note, let's then continue with the uncertain future and our best
Yeah,
understanding
we're
of
trying to
it.
tie it together to how EPA transmission impacts some of the portfolios we looked at, because there is the connection there. We're just trying to set the stage a little bit.
Yeah, and I think for the transmission discussion here, it's just important to understand, if we talk about alternative resources to avoid tier 2 costs, like
Right.
wind or solar, there are other aspects of that make feasibility difficult. And I think that's the bottom line, when it comes to those considerations. It's something we should be having on our radar screen. It's something that we should think about going forward to the extent that that tier 2 number is there for us to consider. But these are some of the challenges that we're facing. We did also want to mention the microhydro evaluation. We were asked to review your historical studies, which are pretty old at this point. 2012 pump hydro study. Look carefully at what that was, as well as the 2008 microhydro study, and think about, okay, well, what's the role, if any, of these types of resources going forward. If, and sort of try to benchmark that. It wasn't part of our scope to really dive deep into assessing those costs. That's actually a pretty involved study. But we do have a lot of expertise in how, costs have risen in labor, engineering, procurement, construction, and track a lot of these things for development resources across the country. So it's helpful to kind of draw on that expertise when thinking about these projects in particular. And overall, our conclusions are that, in looking at a screening level, it's very difficult just to produce those costs. It does take a full study to get there, number one. So if you wanted to have that, you'd have to move in the direction of study. But our general view on the pumped hydro, that study being 12 years old, if you roll the cost of that study forward to today's dollars, we're looking at around $90 a megawatt hour. And that doesn't even account for increases in labor and engineering, procurement, and construction, which have risen during that period dramatically. And so I want to be sure, because the $90 is almost getting to a point where, that's marginal consideration. And we haven't even reflected additional adjustments that would increase that cost. Why is that important? Well, if you're thinking mostly about the micro hydro study, it's smaller than the pumped hydro. And which means the economics would likely be even worse than what we were seeing out of that study. Now, there were no cost figures to really benchmark against the micro hydro study in particular. So there's nothing to look at in particular, but just given the size being very small without a lot of economies, we're expecting that would be an even worse result in terms of cost than the pumped hydro study. So that's our best judgment on that picture. I think if you roll forward on that, we would, suggest that those aren't good candidates for additional exploration for those reasons. To offset future tier 2 needs, we see other alternatives that would bear out more focus and what we chose to look at in this study. And then we have this last caveat here that, if you did want to look at those, you'd want to develop and spend the effort to get estimates that are site specific, and that can be pretty involved. But we don't suggest it going forward for reasons of market movement and the overall cost to develop those. So.
Could you work with staff if you're gonna do a couple more little revisions and clarify the document that we were given to reflect what you've just said? When I read the document first, I thought, well, it was we didn't really have numbers, and you ought to look for numbers, where you've said it's not worth looking for numbers. I did not see that in the document. So if you could reflect that, so when people look at it in the future, they'll know why we decided not to do it.
Okay, great. Thanks for that thought. Appreciate that. We're excited that you read through the report. So.
Oh, yeah.
All right. We as far as our overall summary of the supply side resources, I just mentioned micro hydro. We did have a focus on wind, battery, as well as solar. And I want to roll through that briefly to give you a sense of those portfolio economics. That was the substantive portion of our IRP modeling for economics. So we'll do that. And also talk a little bit about sizing and how those resources might fit into the portfolio in the future from a shape standpoint, or how they generate energy. We do have some key modeling assumptions that we've laid out. We're sort of projecting bondable tier 1 rates to increase at a small margin here. We're expecting tier 2 rates going forward to increase pretty significantly, and that's anticipated with market rates. Those closely track with market forwards in the Pacific Northwest, and so we're seeing market forwards increasing more significantly. So there's some cost parameters that are built into this, and then also resource sizing there at the bottom. is optimized for the analysis based on the overall shape, again, using that word of wind and how it fits into the curve for MWNL. We'll say this again, but that seems to be one of the better fits into your overall load from the standpoint of an additional resource consideration.
Can I ask a question on that bullet point on the gas forwards? So as there's more renewables on the system and gas becomes less prevalent, do you see a different metric for the marginal resources other than away from gas and to something else?
Yep, I think that's a great question. I think there's still a pretty significant amount of reliance.
Right.
And so what happens with intermittent due to the nature of their must-take nature, they essentially, when you acquire them, they go to the bottom of the stack. And you build your controllable resources on top of that set more of the margin.
Compared to the other way it is where it's the other way around.
Correct. And so I actually don't envision that the marginal resources will stop being shaped by natural gases at the margin, because that is a fluctuation that's taking place in terms of the resources that are needed, and those are the ones turning up and turning down.
The only difference would be if what we read every day in a different version, that battery technology finally takes off,
Well,
then that'd be battery rather than gas, right?
well, battery resources are, not to go in a separate direction here, but they're meant, for short snippets of time and, presently don't have really long duration.
So, but you read that some lab somewhere has an idea that it'll make it long duration batteries too.
Yeah, well, they're working on those technologies, much like the discussion earlier. They're still higher cost and not fully mature in the market, but perhaps one day we'll be talking about really long duration batteries and how they're used along with wave technology and how that's become more cost economic. So I want to show you some successive charts here just to give you the picture for this load following. We said Bonneville meeting your total requirements, and you see this. We show high load growth and a regular load growth scenario. This would be a portfolio where Bonneville continues to meet all your needs through tier 1 and any remaining tier 2 needs. The most conservative approach, because they have the responsibility to meet all of your periods of high demand as well as all of your energy needs. The second one here is that same load following contract with some consideration of wind to offset some of that future tier 2 need. What does that look like in terms of the economics and that shape? As I said before, and we'll look at the shape here, this is your net load on an average annual net load. This is a daily shape. So bear in mind, this is average annual, but the wind fits that resource shaping better than most in terms of, what that average, daily shape would be and how a resource would actually fit to that shape. Again, it's not perfect, right? You see, these aren't perfectly aligning, and then there's also seasonal differences. Solar is even more challenging, and we'll look at that in a moment, but because there's, you don't get as much solar in the winter at times of a serious need. So this is load following from Bonneville with wind and battery storage. So this is a third portfolio, and you might use the battery to avoid some of those RSS costs we talked about and shape that resource a little bit further. So you see that. And then fourth is the consideration of a solar resource going in there rather than the wind. So we have 4 different portfolios there that we've looked at in evaluating economics. And there's that solar shape as well. It looks nice, doesn't it? But this is average annual. And so you think, oh, that fits. But then in the summer, that shape is much higher than the average need. And then in the winter, it's not providing nearly anything.
Can you go back to the one chart previous?
Go backwards
One chart. Should that say solar down there?
It should. That's a typo. Yeah, wind and battery. Forgive us there. That was a holdover from the previous slide. Yep, so when you look at a summer shape, you think, okay, that starts to fit into that net requirement well, but in the winter, solar is not generated at any significant level. And we're also in need of that resource showing up in the winter to a greater degree. So you have these seasonal considerations with respect to how well does a resource even fit with what we would want. Leah showed the seasonal picture earlier. So it's a big part of thinking about how to consider next steps on resources like these.
Ironically, the same thing with water, because we've had, and it was at the eighties, we had the big shortage and the dams were way down and we were struggling by
It's like 77, I think, was
Yeah.
the low water year, or
Yeah.
somewhere in there. Mhm.
So that's a look into our resource planning process. Conclusions here, just to wrap our portion of this. Here are the 4 portfolios that we looked at in terms of levelized 20-year costs. This is taking a look over that 20-year planning horizon, thinking carefully about which resources are most appropriate. One of the things we see that solar doesn't fit very well. And while the economics of solar are potentially competitive with a load following agreement, doesn't fit very well in terms of shape and leaves some market replacement exposure that's challenging. Other factors here to consider: wind does fit as a reasonable shape in consideration of additional service of that tier 2 component, and its costs are also, on its face, look pretty good from the scale and size. Again, we emphasized this earlier on, but transmission of that type of resource and where is that resource to bring to us is a huge issue. And it's one of the reasons that we have less confidence in an approach like that, apart from just administration and the work that it takes to get that prepared and negotiated.
So the wind resource there, is that an all-in cost, or is that not including RSS and, secondary crediting service and all that?
No, it includes the all-in cost of the shaping and bringing that resource in. The challenge here is that the economies, you're looking for a certain size and we're pricing a larger project.
You're
So
200 or 300 or 400 megawatt wind farm.
maybe not that large, but still, you have to have a large project. It has to be transmission deliverable, which
Right.
could be a cost that's not included here.
Mhm.
And then secondly, you have to negotiate that with other counterparties that are interested in the same thing in order to get the size that you're looking for. And that's also challenging. So this is indicative of, hey, we see opportunity here, potentially in the future, and it's something to think about. But we also need a perfect storm of some other elements to come together for that to, work out in our favor. So that puts into perspective for you a little bit on why that load following contract is still the most conservative option and continues to be one of our anticipated lower cost scenarios going forward.
And the only other thing I would point out on that chart, just because I remember, if you go back, when we were first looking at this, I was thinking, oh, wow, like that load following and wind, it's a lot less, but the scale there is really important, right? So like the 35 to 50, that scale, like when it actually breaks down, what you're looking at is really just a few dollars per megawatt hours, right? Difference between all of these. So just wanted to point that out because I think it's sometimes easy to think that
Yeah.
if that could be more impactful with that.
And I think it would be helpful for us if you could make that point in a note in the revisions that this is a small amount of it, and then the earlier point that there are all these other uncertainties and costs that probably make it so it costs more. You could do that, please.
Regarding the report or?
In the report.
And-
No, not that your report costs more, that the wind.
Well said.
The wind choice costs more.
Well,
Thank you.
all right. Final conclusions here of those, and just includes our recommendations. We see that wind PPA as a purchase power agreement as one of the best fits for alternatives. But don't recommend that pursuit at this time because of the transmission challenges as well as the economy of scale challenge for getting that right size. We do recommend continuing forward in your plans with a bonneville load following structure based on the current understanding of the products. That seems to meet your needs best going forward. And there are going to be some market changes in the next few years that make this even more insulated with Bonneville versus, looking at a resource of your own. And then we have a final recommendation here about adding the waste management renewable energy landfill component back into Exhibit A to enable that resource to serve our load requirements. So when the contract expires.
We talked about some issues with that need to be looked at, but in addition to that, that's a declining resource. The amount of gas that the landfill will produce is going down, and it's already peaked, right, John?
Yes.
Yeah.
So how does that impact that? If we add it to the exhibit, will that?
It's reflected in the exhibit,
Yeah.
production.
Oh, to say adding it back, what is that?
That's a reference to, we currently temporarily remove that resource from our, because we don't need it to serve the load. And BPA remarkets it for us. That's what that's.
Right, okay, so take it back to load, but just to offset tier 2, is that what you're thinking?
It's a non-federal.
It's a non-federal
I mean,
resource that's avoiding.
looking forward to do that instead of tier 2.
We would have to use that, according to our current contract with BPA, we would need to use that resource first before we purchase a BPA, a federal tier 2 product.
Yes.
So it comes first.
Okay.
Yes, before, I meant
Yes.
BPA tier 2. Okay, thank you.
Right, thank you. Yeah, questions, Commissioner?
One of the things that the water lights enjoyed for decades is a niche from a pricing standpoint. Could you go back to the chart that showed the 4 columns and the $50 cost? So that references what things are going to cost us. If we were to compare ourselves to Pacific Power or to Bonneville, where would those are we losing our niche as we start to struggle for power, or are they going to be just as the same boat we are?
Everybody's in the same boat.
Yeah.
Okay, so we should be historically continuing 20 years from now have that same.
So the recent rate increases PG had and Pacific Core had and are proposing far exceed where we're at.
Okay.
By hundreds of dollars, essentially. So their last rate increase, I think I saw 35 to 44% were their rate increase, the best road utilities in Oregon.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Additional questions this time? Thank you very much. If the commission doesn't have any additional questions of staff or the consultants, I would ask for any interested party questions. And are there any raised hands on Zoom or anybody in the Zoom?
There is not.
Okay, and I'm assuming the same is still true for the phone?
Correct.
Thank you. So I think that we want to accept these materials into the hearing record, but I also heard that we have some amendments that have been asked. So how would you like us to accept those records?
Well, I'd suggest that you accept what's been presented tonight into the hearing record. I think that the report, you're going to continue the hearing. It's going to come back to you before it's adopted at the next, when you continue to July. So I don't think you need to do anything with regards to the draft report at this point.
Okay.
In terms of accepting it. Also asking you to accept the notices that were produced into the hearing record, so all the materials in the packet. And then we'll be asking the commission to continue, assuming everything else is we've concluded with the interested parties and there's no other questions.
Then
Then we'll be asking to have the commission continue the hearing at the point of staff report to the July 16th meeting on 2024 again at 5 p.m.
Okay, wonderful. So I accept all the written materials into the hearing record. Then I would ask for a motion to continue the hearing to the date of July 16th, 24.
So moved.
I have a motion from Commissioner Gormley.
I'll second.
I have a second from Commissioner Christensen. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed, say nay. And passes unanimously, so the public hearing will continue on July 16th, 2024.
Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
your
much for your
time.
time.
Thank you for being here to present to us. We appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay.
So I have a question, Sam. If it was posted at 5 o'clock and we started at 5 later, is that,
Well, we're open at our public meeting. If somebody arrives at 5.
they'll see that we
they're
haven't
here.
started yet? Okay, and it's on the agenda.
Yeah,
So
it's
they
on the
see
agenda.
there's other
I mean,
business.
trying to start a meeting or a public meeting, I mean, you can do it, but.
Oh, I try to always start public meetings on time.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying the public hearing. What
Yeah.
time was it posted? to start?
It should be here by, if you want to make sure you're on, be here by. We don't want to start at 4:30.
Okay, so you're saying we're in the clear legally, even though we did not start the public hearing right at 5 p.m.
I was just asking for that.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm going to keep moving us through our agenda. Next, we are going to be talking about property liability and workers' comp insurance. And my agenda says that Ryan's joining us, but my packet says Mr. Denmeyer is joining us, who's at the table. So I'm going to go with that.
Ryan's like,
Twice.
How are you? Sorry, yeah, the other day. Oh, good. That's it.
Well, I guess maybe I'll introduce us, introduce the staff report. Ryan Hartzell of Hagen Hampton is with us this evening to present the insurance renewal. My staff report shows the renewal and what is included in that. I did make a couple of small adjustments to the budget to accommodate a couple of quotes that came in just slightly higher than what we had estimated in the draft budget. And also this year, we looked into insurance for the timber in the watershed, fire insurance, and that was, I think, a pretty significant project, and it was really good to be able to work through that for us, and so to present that information as well. Those quotes, by the way, are not included in the proposed budget, so. Yeah, so turn over around.
Great. Well, thank you for having me again this evening. In review of the property and casualty insurance program, from when I was here last month, we talked a lot about the commission potentially looking at assuming some more risk in the way of increasing deductibles on the property, putting aggregate loss deductible on the general liability, increasing the capital collision deductibles. And I think that helped. That got us to a target of, 1%. And I think that was really a wise thing, just obviously looking at, just historical loss analysis. I think that was a very good decision. Looking continually, earthquake obviously is very difficult to purchase. It's really hard in the private market. If you looked at your homeowners policies or your commercial buyer of office buildings, 3rd Street is really tough to buy, property insurance for earthquake with old buildings. So very fortunate, it's kind of one of those things we hold our breath every year. Can we still get that excess? They give us 180-day notice if they're not going to renew it, but it's always a relief when, hey, if you can send us the underlying what we have, we're in good shape. So we did see about a 16% increase on that. I think last year was almost 19. Workers' compensation, again, anything less than 1's good. We did see an increase from 0.15 in the experience modification rating to 0.98. Some losses did get factored into some things that obviously want to control. But as we look at losses, there's no patterns that necessarily are alarming. We know about the exposures and the risks posed by the workers in the field and the nature of work they do. And there is.
Are we still in our own pool?
Yes.
Okay, because at one time we were put in with the police and the fire department and popped it up. Okay.
Yeah, no, luckily you're contained on your own on that. This is guaranteed loss, so you get adjustment first what we call first dollar adjustment on there, so there's no deductible on that program. And of course, we don't have the final pricing yet on the cyber. The difficult thing with cyber, and it's the same way with the city, that, you know, they don't put terms out to us very early. It's just a little bit difficult in the market. When we do get it, we get the 12 months, obviously, for the annual policy, but the commission made the decision last year to go 3 million in light of cyber risks. We see stability in that market, so I'm not expecting anything significant on that. I'm really pleased to see it.
What do you mean you see stability? Because I think last year we said that there were only 11 or 17 providers in the US, something like that. And that was part of the impact of the rates going through the roof.
I think 2 years ago, the rates really went through the roof. Last year, we saw that same pool of carriers. Nobody's dropped out, which is good. Because we saw some stability, the commission decided to go from 1 million to 3 million. We looked at the options. I feel like that's good. What I'm forecasting, what I've seen working with cyber and a lot of other industries, we're not seeing 50% rate increases. We're not seeing 30% rate increases. We're seeing 10, or if there's big exposure change, something on there. It's steady. I think we're getting a handle as an industry on losses and how to deal with bad actors and ransomware. So our two big issues are still employees downloading something, and then somebody's in the computer system and they want to ransom. And so those are but I think we're getting smarter about how we're paying ransoms and how we're doing that. So yeah, good questions on what that looks like. But again, we don't have 100 years of data or even really a good 25 years. So, but we are seeing stability in that.
Okay. I will share, if you don't mind, quickly, that in my recent trip to Switzerland, and one of the areas we covered was IT. So we did a pretty in-depth IT, and I asked the head of IT in Geneva what they did about cyber insurance, and they don't carry any. The entire country doesn't carry any cyber insurance, and they stopped after they had a massive cyber attack that essentially shut down the whole country for about 3 hours, but they were able to get the whole country, including the airports, back online in about 3 hours, which was an incredible feat. But that was the approach they took, was to abandon cyber insurance. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think the hard part in America is, if half the people have it, half the people that don't, then you hate to be the half that don't have it, because, we're running up against that. But we're seeing, really there's other industries that are so vulnerable. You work with a lot of contractors. We had a situation here, just a contractor that was, basically the victim of fraud electronically, and it didn't impact water and light, but we saw how easy it is for people that aren't, committed to robust IT risk management and water and light, and we'll run into that. So I spent a lot of times with contractors. No matter if you have a computer and you're sending an email, you have risk. And so I spent a lot of time with contractors. Like, I know you don't think you have risk, but people can see you moving invoices back and forth and moving money, and we're very digital. So but a fascinating story about Switzerland. Wow. I hope you don't mind if I share that at some point. Can I steal that from you and share that?
I'll send you my notes in the slide deck.
For this presentation, I did want to spend some time, as Mark and John and I worked on. Wildfire is a big part of the agenda. We had the forester here and talking about that. So this was unique, and I think we were all a little surprised sometimes about the terms and what's available in the marketplace. And this is a hard product to get. So I think going through this, Mark and John, we submitted the wildfire plan, and I think it was John that, hey, we should turn this into, and I think that wildfire plan that, commissions put together helped, because it gave the underwriter a sense that this is a professionally managed watershed. And I think there's, different growths that we talked about, and I think those are fire barriers. So we were able to get terms to look at what pricing is. This is unique insurance, because a lot of times I get questions when we talk with buyers like, okay, well, I own all these buildings, they're all going to burn down. So can I just take, maybe insure just a portion of the buildings, but not all of them, but I could apply the loss to any particular building? Well, no, because that's not how it works. But uniquely with this product, we were able to look at what we call fire and scar policy. So we looked at, I think, a value, what was it, around 60 million for a market value of the watershed. And we looked at some different options, and I think, did everybody get a chance to see the pricing models in their packets? So, with that, it's a really simple peril that we're insuring against. That's fire. I think wildfire is our main risk, but it's really any fire that we have. So we have a logging contractor we have a timber sale, somebody causes a loss. That's better than a wildfire because somebody else is paying us first. So that logging contractor, we're gonna dip into their insurance.
They're not underinsured.
Right.
Because it lost.
Yeah, and I think that was something we talked about too, when we have, say, Stimson or Hampton purchase a sale. You know, their insurance is in play, but they're requiring to be indemnified from the logging contractor. And then, so we have actually two buckets there we can pick from, but wildfire is the big one. There's new mapping out. Wildfire is just getting to be a real significant issue for property insurers. And people are kind of running from it. We're seeing, people that own properties in areas, what we call protection class 10 or outside city limits, there's no fire protection. It's very difficult to even buy fire insurance because of wildfire. So with that said, I was pleased to see we were able to have some limits to talk about and discuss a little bit. I will say on this, it's wildfire we're insuring. We're going to insure fire, period. What's not covered is international acts of terrorism. The state of Oregon isn't going to be very motivated, even if we were to have an international act of terrorism attack. They know that those policies are excluded. Those are exclusions in every property policy. So nobody's super motivated to want to say it's an international act of terrorism, even if it is. That would be one form of fire loss. It could be, if you can prove it, would be excluded in the policy, but it's really just a basic wildfire loss. We're going to take that limit of insurance. You can see that they're going to look at a satellite, see what's damaged, and determine the loss from that.
So I had a question when I was thinking about this, about, what's important in the watershed and what's valuable, but I think we're not using the revenue from the timber to support our costs of water here, but we do have the watershed up there. And I was just curious, like, if we had a wildfire up there, is there, I don't know what potential there is for that to actually damage our water availability. Like if the whole watershed burned, would we be able to would we be able to use water from McGuire, or would it have any impact on the water source?
It would have an impact, and I think the impact would be the additional cost to treat the water, because you're gonna have more sediment and more material in the reservoirs.
Especially when it rains and there's runoff and
Right,
that kinds of thing. But I would guess that this policy has nothing to do with our water resource. It just has to do with the timber that we lose, right? We're just getting timber. And so that would also mean that there would be no money that would be available for remediation of the land
We'd
to
have to-
protect the watershed,
We
right?
would have to somehow come up with replant essentially after the fire.
But that still wouldn't take care of the immediate.
No, that'd be a
problems,
long
which
term.
would- yeah. Okay, thanks. I was just curious
Yeah.
how why did I care?
That's
Or,
why you-
what's my biggest care, I guess?
Watching San Diego fires and that, there was millions of dollars worth of timber that got scarred and landed, and they logged it, for a long time. So there was a lot of revenue generated off that. But just deep in the confines of this policies or fine print, it says any merch that you sell is gonna come against the insurance proceeds.
No, we're looking at strictly a fire loss and scar damage to the standing timber.
And the other thing is, our surveys have been on the ground and, they're very in-depth surveys. I'm concerned about the accuracy of the satellite compared to what really,
Yeah.
how, are they, 20% off?
Well, I think they're gonna do both, aren't they? They're gonna come, they're
Okay,
gonna
I thought it was just.
they're gonna survey by satellite, and then they're gonna come out and assess of it, so.
Yeah, you're gonna put your forester out there and determine what they're gonna see, and then they're gonna look at it.
Oh,
on the satellite.
so But I would also say the satellite technology has gotten very good, and we're down to, 6 inch or 6 pixels for the, very fine data.
I think, to answer your question, on water, one of the things that could be considered, when you have a natural resource like that is pollution. Fire could be a pollutant, so if that's something that need to be considered, down the line, you could look at a first party pollution policy too. So if you're considering that, that would be a product.
That's if we create something that hurts somebody, not us, right?
Well, that's third party pollution, that's available too.
But I guess the question would be, you have the fire, but the fire's not what's polluting the water, it's the runoff from the lack of trees and timber. So that's, is it really pollution or is it just, is it nature at that point?
And is pollution a separate from, like if somebody put something in if somebody purposefully put something in the waters?
That's what I don't know.
Yeah, and that's, we carefully look at the definition of what pollution includes, making sure we get fire as a trigger, and then, what other contaminants, so we can't prove the cause of loss, what's included in that pollution.
But going back to your point, I think the thing I would be concerned about is what they're using to suppress the fire.
Yeah, right.
It's very retardants, and if that gets into our watershed, water supply.
Which kind of brings us to a conversation about PFAS
Mhm.
and are there any protections currently available in the market for PFAS contamination?
I don't know if you know what those are.
I'm not sure I know what that means.
They're essentially polyfluoride, I don't remember that.
There's a protection with treatment processes are coming up with.
There's,
Class.
what did you say?
Treatment processes. They're called forever chemicals. There's like 6,000 of them.
Yeah, and they're inside all of our bodies.
Yeah.
too, just so you know.
Because
You are contaminated
Yeah.
currently.
Because it's in things like, so your clothing, fire retardant, clothing hazard. There's many things.
Non-stick cookware,
Okay, non-stick cooker's another one.
I think
Firefighting
rain
foam.
jackets.
With something like that, I think if you look at pollution or sand and timber policy, we need a trigger. We got to be able to identify when it happened or who caused it. So with that, if it's just airborne like that, that could be a little bit of a problem for triggering a pollution policy. We can't just pinpoint, here's our cause of loss. It happened here. Fire's easy to tell. That could be a little bit of an issue. But again, could that get picked up in there? Yeah, we can figure out the trigger, but those are certainly things that we can look at.
I think I don't want to belabor it tonight. I think that as we're kind of looking down the road for next year, that there is a whole host of things that are evolving around this, including the responsibility of utilities, the potential treatment, lack of treatment. There's the causation concerns. I would be interested to know how the insurance industry is considering or starting to intersect with that, or if it's kind of not brought into the conversation yet. But I know there's a lot of legislation happening around it at the state and federal level. So, well, I don't know of anything that's happening at the state, I misspoke, but definitely at the federal level. So, and I know that some of our local unions are advocating at the state level for some state regulation as well. So, consideration for next year.
Thank you.
So are we being asked to make a decision on the level of the four options that are presented here?
I think we're
Well,
being asked for
plus-
two things.
Right, the original,
Do you want to proceed with the policy and then what level?
which then that number would be added to what you've presented here today.
Would be added to the water division budget, the operating budget. of the water.
And staff is recommending what level?
Well, I think the first question is,
Oh.
do we want to have
Oh,
insurance
yes.
on the?
Well, I guess
on
you
the
know what
tip?
my decision is.
Um,
Yeah.
And I guess historically, has this ever been thought about previously?
Yes,
or
Mike
discussed?
Keys, who was the president of an insurance company, asked about, what, 15 years ago, had asked about, why don't we get insurance on the timber? And the discussion was that it was very expensive and, industry didn't get it. It was just not really something that people did. Wasn't. And, you know, we have now had that many years where we haven't paid a premium too, so,
I mean, it's a couple 100,000 a year at least.
yeah.
That will have a significant impact on rates.
Yeah, so what's the staff's thoughts about having the watershed insured or having the timber insured?
Well, we've been fortunate so far.
Mhm.
You know, we've done a lot of work in making sure we mitigate.
Yeah, the fire mitigation plan was amazing,
Yeah,
so.
and so, you know, we've trimmed the timber around the transmission line. You know, the concern is if we don't have anything, we're not gonna have any revenue at all. On that, and so you're looking, so I guess the concern would be if we lose the timber revenue completely. We're probably looking at somewhere between, I think Mark calculated around, not you, Mark, but Mark, somewhere around a 30% rate increase to cover that cost.
We're not using the watershed plans for,
But we're using it for
I
capital.
mean, the timber plans.
Yeah, we're using it for capital.
Well, I mean, rates could go up or you could not do capital.
But I mean, but yeah,
I mean,
right. But,
somewhere the money is gonna have to be
Yeah.
replaced.
but you have to do some, we're gonna have to do
Yeah.
some capital. So there's gonna probably be some
Yeah.
time period where you would, you know, raise rates over a period of time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I just feel like it's like now that I understand. Now that I maybe have a little more clarity on what a fire up there could potentially do to the water. Then it's like, do you insure the timber so you get the revenue, so you get the money for the timber so that you can mitigate the. Problems that
Right.
you're gonna have with the
Revenue
the-
you get from
with the water,
insurance.
with the waters. I mean, you use that insurance money to. Try to
Offset some of the
offset
costs.
some of the costs for making sure the watershed's okay, right?
Well, you'd have to use it to replace the watershed, right? You couldn't use it to treat water. I mean,
I just like, it's like if you were trying to mitigate
Whatever-
runoff
whatever you wanna-
into the reservoir, like by building, did something to try to prevent damage from getting worse to the water because there's no trees around. It
But
feels like
it's, you can use the revenue for whatever. It's,
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm looking at it like not so much that the timber's gone, but that you need to protect the watershed.
but I mean, one of the first things you're gonna do is you're gonna try and replant as soon as you can.
Sure.
That'll be expensive too.
Yeah, and
But
that'd be a
but
cost.
if you look at, if you look at how much money you would get for the premium. You know, like if number 4, the cheapest one, for $125,000, you basically recover
After
$4 million, so after the deductible, it's a little more than 1 year's timber revenue.
Mhm.
Some years it's not even 1 year's timber revenue.
Right.
So I don't know if that's really worth it to us.
Right, that's kind of where I was at, is that it's like.
because
It's a hard
essentially
decision.
every 4 years, you're foregoing a year of revenue
Right.
in order to
Okay.
justify the cost of the insurance.
No,
Yes.
no, it doesn't,
It's 125,000, so it would be more than.
Oh,
4
it
years.
depends on which
Oh.
package.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
right, but I mean, he's talking the lowest.
I'm talking what what you're getting, you're getting 1 year of timber revenue. For those premiums forever, that you pay forever.
Maybe every 10 years.
Every 10 years.
Yeah.
Commissioner?
If you go back, I mean, this is historic. The Tillamook burn, we were never prepared for it. It was freaky weather and stuff, and we have had the kind of weather they had with the Tillamook burn. We've had that weather different times since then, but we are so prepared and educated from the 30s today with our management practices and stuff. Mike's attitude was if you could buy it, you should probably buy it. We certainly have the resources to, but I don't think it's necessarily well spent in light of everything we're already currently doing. And I think I'd be hard pressed to pass.
Well, and the other thing the commission may want to think about is setting aside a portion of reserves
Self-insurance.
to self-insurance, essentially, for that 1 year.
That's where, I mean, if general consensus is we're not having insurance, then that's the insurance we need to have. Because
Because it's a risk.
it will happen.
Yeah.
Right? It will happen. It's just the when. Right?
I mean, wildfire is a part of our reality every
It is.
year.
And the climate change, I mean,
And that's why I
turn
asked.
on the news today.
I asked the question of Brent, because my concern is if you have these enlarged buffers and we have all this
Right.
dead wood in
Right.
those buffers, that just increases our risk.
But the problem is that under no scenario could we afford to insure all the timber.
Oh, yeah, that would be
I mean, if you figure, what do we think the timber's worth?
60 million, so
That seems low, but I mean, so 60 million, if you could get it, which I don't think you can, would cost us.
12 times.
yeah.
If they use that.
A volume discount.
And they, because of this, they may ratchet the premium up even higher though.
I doubt we could get those limits.
Right.
That would be all. I mean, they're probably not gonna put that kind of, it was, that kind of capacity out there for us to purchase.
I think Jody was correct in setting money aside. We certainly have the cash to allocate it right now if we wanted to, but
I mean, as we're working through our financial reserves policy, this is one thing that we could say, okay, this is another component of that we want to include in that policy, sure. As
I
a
would want
risk.
to make sure that it was defined as
Yeah.
such, right? That
Yeah.
it's not just this pot of money and we intend to use it like this, right? Like a household budget. But you would want to make sure that it was a dedicated fund.
And since the timber is, a dedicated, we're essentially using it, and that's what you'll see in the financial reserves policy. We're essentially using it for capital.
Yeah.
So that revenue goes all to capital. Right now.
And I would,
Go ahead.
I was just, if it was a disaster that warranted federal support,
Correct.
you're 2 years from getting the
Right,
money.
well, we know that
So
for
you
sure.
have to have
At least 2
the
years.
ability to do what you need to do to secure the site and to get back to business, right?
And so we do need cash in the bank if we're gonna do that.
So with that in mind, then, because I'm hearing kind of a mixed table here in terms of whether or not we pursue this with maybe an option to self-insure. If we can't get to some consensus around to do this insurance or not. So just continue to explore that self-insure, then would you recommend we do that very aggressively? So that we would have our own payout in a short period of time and redirect some of that money that's currently going to capital and put it in that reserve?
I don't think you'd need to redirect money from capital. What we have reserves right now, we could use a portion of those reserves to just say, okay, we're gonna set aside this for.
But how are we gonna build it? Because we're not gonna get to $60 million
Oh,
overnight.
yeah, well, I don't think you'll ever get to 60 million. I think you need some number that's gonna be, at least 5.
Right.
Probably is a
So-
reasonable number.
The term self-insurance would reflect that we want $5 to $10 million.
Yeah.
So, okay, so again, though, would we go after that very aggressively? Because let's say we didn't pursue insurance and then we had a wildfire this summer or next summer.
So right now we have about $26 million in reserves. And Mark is working on, Mark Beauchamp, the financial reserve consultant, is working on that minimum cash. So what we need to tell him, and Trina, you can tell him this, is that, because she's working with him, is that we want to include wildfire as a risk component in that, what we call the minimum cash, I think is what he's called. Is that what he calls it, Trina?
Yes.
Yeah, the minimum cash pot. So that we say, okay, we know that in that cash pot, there is X amount of dollars reserved for this type of issue, this type of, risk. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
to me,
that makes
yeah.
sense.
So you wouldn't raise rates
No.
to
'Cause you have
generate
the
more
money.
money because of the money coming in from the timber.
Right,
So you just be sure that you didn't draw your
reserves below
reserves
that number.
below that number.
So for purposes of this discussion, that's really a reserve question
Mhm.
or policy
Right,
direction.
and that's what's coming up here in the next couple of months.
Okay, but then we have to approve the insurance
The other
the
insurance.
other
Right,
insurance today.
the
Okay.
renewal that we have in the budget.
Yes.
And also,
Go ahead, I'm
and
sorry.
also, I didn't mention this being, but authorized the mayor to sign the safe workers' comp form.
And I have a
That's-
clarifying question. Are we moving forward with the cyber tonight or is that coming back later?
I don't know how we handled it in the past.
That is back in July.
August.
August.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, this will come by July.
Tom,
Yeah.
I understood from your questions and your comments that you would prefer to purchase the insurance. So that's why I thought you were going. No,
No.
you would prefer to not
No.
impact rates.
No, I just
et
think,
cetera.
look, if you look at it, here's what you get, and it wasn't worth raising the rates to people to get there. Yeah, I'm sorry. it was-
I'm comfortable with.
So,
the
so what
direction we're going.
I'm hearing the commission wants to is directing staff to essentially put into our financial reserves policy a component for wildfire risk for the watershed, and then to set that up for a minimum of $5 million.
So-
Maybe more, maybe.
I said,
Yeah,
I feel like this is a lot to
Yeah,
get to in one bite from just a quote that came up in a meeting and, you know, we're waiting for our cost of service
Right.
and some other things. And so I feel like this is a good plan, but for me, it's like, maybe I just feel comfortable approving the rates that we have without doing anything. with
Right.
The
Maybe
timber insurance right now with a plan to.
and that's what I was getting at is we're gonna come back to the commission with a financial reserves policy.
I would like to see that.
And then what I was talking about is having Mark include something in that for the wildfire risk.
and we could just call the $5 million a placeholder.
Right.
Just so he knows it's there, he knows it's a real number, and then we would then make a decision subject to review every few years.
Right.
about
So
what our
we're gonna bring that reserve policy
That's
back
coming
to
back,
another
correct.
meeting where, and after some more exploration and
Right.
conversation. And for right now, I would ask legal counsel to read the requested action so we can get it right.
Okay. So the motion would be to approve the following 2024-25 insurance programs recommended by Mr. Hartzell of Hagan Hamilton. Property liability, auto, earthquake, and flood insurance, the CIS package from City County Insurance Services for an annual premium of $490,049.32. Workers' compensation coverage from SAFE for an annual premium of $95,108.48. Excess earthquake coverage from Landmark American Insurance Company for an annual premium of $152,948.50. And fiduciary liability coverage from Great American for an annual premium of $5,414. Authorizing the mayor and the clerk to sign the 24-25 safe workers' compensation renewal form as presented in the packet.
so move.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Christensen, a second from Commissioner Tankersley. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work and the research on that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we
Bring this
appreciate it.
discussion forward.
Mayor.
Yeah.
Can I ask the term wildfire, is it defined specifically? Because I'm thinking about, we could have a burn going on.
I believe it is.
As a
We
definition.
could have a burn going on the adjoining property and gets
Right.
away and wipes out stuff.
That would be classified as a wildfire.
So any fire then would be a wildfire, I mean, lightning and all that good
Lightning's-
stuff.
yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
I just
yeah.
want to be sure that
Oh, yeah.
we aren't honed in on a definition.
Even if it's a fire that would be, and I forbid, hate to even say this.
Don't say it.
So-
Don't say it.
Don't say it.
From someone, yeah,
Don't say it.
I was thinking something else, but that's.
Some hunter.
All right, so let's move into the fiscal year 24-25 budget. Thank you for staying with us, Mr. Dunbar, and I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you. So this year, our budget process has been a little bit different than in the past. We've had 4 work sessions. The first was in February. We looked at our capital budgets, then we looked at payroll in March and our operating budgets for the water and light divisions in April. And then in May, last month, we looked at the whole budget documents, all the narratives and all the financial information included. in draft form, and this evening we have the proposed budget complete as well. We did make, like I mentioned just a bit ago, that there was $4,000 expense increase for insurance to accommodate the quotes that came in slightly higher than our estimates. Those have been folded in. There's a $1,750 increase to the light division and a $2,250 increase to the water division. That's in the budget, as well as some narrative changes, pretty minor stuff. We did make a change as requested at the last meeting on the House Bill 4134 designation for the funds related to Zone 2 work. And all that was documented in a budget revision page that's included at the back of the budget document, and also included that with the staff report. And I also included a budget summary that shows where those changes, which numbers they affect in the overall summary. We've gone through our operating losses in the water and the light division, as well as our net income and our capital, and then the effect of all of that on cash flow for the year and into the future. So we do have, as mentioned previously, we do have cost of service studies that we've got water underway now, scheduled for the public hearing will be scheduled for in July, or 7th of July to begin that process. Light will come next year. It's important that we do these studies so that we are able to address, the changing financial conditions that we're experiencing, inflation and other items. So anyway, so that's, we really don't have other changes to bring or to discuss. So with that, staff's recommending adoption of the proposed budget with or without changes. And be happy to answer questions.
I have a really easy one. In the fiber portion, it lays out, it says provides service to the three entities, the water and light, the city and school district. And then it says and other customers. Can you expand on the other customers a little?
Yeah, so we do have other customers that utilize the dark fiber. We're not a typical internet provider. We don't have a head end, and they have to light up the fiber. We don't do that. So
Dark fiber leaks on.
yeah, so it's
How many other customers are there?
we have 7, well, we have 8 total. So we have 7 that pay us monthly, 1 that pays us annually.
And are the names of those, I'm assuming, companies, priority, or, are they?
Is it a secret?
Thank you.
Yeah, they're, yeah, I don't
It's
know
not
that they're secret, but I know one of them is BPA, and I don't remember the other 7, honestly. They're, John could probably tell us, customer service manager.
We've
LS
used that,
Networks.
so sometimes they just had fiber that was already between point A and point B, and rather than us building a second line, we just pay them a monthly rate to carry our traffic across that. That it's a very small number of customers. And
Yeah.
It was not, it was a small amount of money.
Yeah.
Too. It is a little bit of revenue.
Yeah, I think I'm asking about it less on the revenue side and more on the access to the utility side. Which I know that there's some question about whether or not fiber is a utility, but we are a utility and it is in our budget, so I would argue
It's a
that
utility.
makes it a utility.
You're right.
And so that's kind of the root of my question. I think I didn't fully recognize the number of other companies that were on there. And so when it seemed kind of contained within this governmental system, I didn't really question access to the utility.
So when you mean access, what do you mean by access? Because
So could any company,
Yes.
get fiber, access to our fiber?
And there's capacity.
Yes, we have 30, so our main ring is 144 fibers. We have 36 fibers reserved for the 3 entities. And then the others are using 2 apiece, I would assume, per lease. So there's a roughly over close to 100 fibers available. Yeah.
And if a company wanted to do that, they would find the information for requesting that service on our website or?
I don't think it's traditionally been on our website. Usually everybody knows, because everybody knows who's who. It's a joint
It's
use
a bit
issue.
different because when it was set up originally, it was that we took pains, it's dark fiber. So we don't light the fiber. If we lit the fiber, we'd be regulated by federal communication system, FCC. But we're essentially just leasing space online is what we're doing. So it's
So somebody knows
also it's
from us.
analogous to.
So we're leasing and subletting.
No,
We
we
own it,
own it.
and
Waterlight owns it.
We own it. And so we're just.
Like an
Oh, we're
apartment.
leasing, I see,
Yeah,
I see.
we're leasing,
We're
we're
providing
renting,
lease.
we're renting the
Right, right.
space on the fiber line for somebody else to use it. We don't light it up, we don't energize it, it's just a piece of property that we're renting.
Yeah.
Essentially.
I definitely don't want to hold up our conversation today. We have such a robust agenda, but I think I would be interested in digging into that a little bit more, especially with a limited amount of it. So how's the prioritization? Is it first come, first served?
Come first,
As
come
the
first.
innovation campus develops, we don't know what, businesses would be out there. They wouldn't necessarily be in the know.
Well, I think out there though,
It's a really, the fiber ring for water and light's a fairly small and
right.
just a ring that
Circuit.
connects
Right.
to certain circuits. So like out there would be no
Right,
connectivity.
Right, I know
to-
we were trying to get the legislature to help us extend it to, so that it would encompass
Well,
that, but
but they have fiber out
But
there.
we have fiber. Well, not we.
Hunter.
There is fiber out
there now,
out there,
existing.
so there wouldn't necessarily be a
Third
need
party
to.
vendor.
So I think for me, this
Over
ties
that.
in with kind of our larger economic development and, where ultimately we're heading. And if this is a utility that we offer, then how do we offer and really make it available to our business community as a whole, whether those are businesses that are here now or businesses that may come in the future, whether it's businesses that are already in the know, or if those are businesses that aren't in the know, but we have an asset and we have a limited amount of it. And so how do we make that available unless the commission doesn't generally want to make it available?
Well, I think, Remy, I think we've always said, if we lease it out dark, we should, but what we've also said is that it doesn't make sense for us to light up the fiber and be an internet provider.
Yeah, I don't think that's what.
That's
you're
not what
saying.
I'm suggesting.
You're just suggesting we would.
Make it more accessible and
So
transparent.
the problem with it is that it is not what we would call in the communication space. So it is in the power space. So that means that if you're going to work on it, you actually have to be a qualified lineman, not a communications person. Because of the way it's structured and the way it was built when it was installed.
Mhm.
So essentially, it is not as simple as somebody just coming and saying, well, I want to attach to your fiber.
I see.
It's more complicated than that.
But Remy, I think that if it's perhaps if you're suggesting we should market it better, then that makes sense to me, that changing what we do other than marketing, because MEDP knew about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we know about it.
I've talked, and actually, we did a project for out here.
Fibers.
We
Yep.
put some fiber into the
Yep.
industrial park, we
park,
extended it for somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm not suggesting that we actively market it. Because we're not really positioned to stand up a program around that, et cetera. So I'm not suggesting that, but
That's the no.
if it's available, then it should be easy to access that information that's available. So I think that's where I'm looking for a little clarity going forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, other questions and comments on the budget?
I think Mark, you caught every alphabet soup in there, but there were a couple.
Yeah, okay.
You know what? I'm gonna let it go. This, I can't find it because I had it written out.
If you find it, you can just email it to us.
Okay, maybe
It's
I'll-
just a
I'll-
typo.
It wasn't a typo, it was spelling something out.
Oh, okay, it was the acronym.
I think yes, it's on page 4 of the printed one. And you may have already spelled it out, CIAC.
Oh,
Less
capital-
in kind. Is that
Yeah.
a common term that
Yeah,
people
it's
would know who read this?
Capital
Okay.
contribution and aid to construction, so.
Maybe not me. Okay, all right, well,
Kayak.
it's a kayak.
Kayak, yeah.
Yeah,
Heard
got
it
it.
that way, and it's spelled it that way.
Okay, but did you know what the acronym was?
No, I'm really good at figuring them out.
I'm an alphabet soup person and I think that it's really important because you want to have people be able, I mean, this is an easier document to read after our work session, I have to say. I'm not going to require every person, but I do think it's important to spell out.
We
Yeah.
can spell it out. So.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other amendments? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the proposed McMinnville Water and Light fiscal year 2024-25 budget with the small amendment.
So moved.
1 second.
Did I read it okay?
Yeah,
Uh,
that's gonna be for the electric, water and fiber divisions. And are the amendments are as described in the budget summary, is that? Or is it finalized already?
I only meant the amendment of
the
spelling
style.
out the
Kayak.
acronym.
Okay, sure.
That's
Okay.
needs to change.
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Gormley and a second from Commissioner Christensen. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. And the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Now to substation transformer proposals. I'll invite Chad Hudson, our purchasing manager, to join us.
Evening.
Good evening.
Right? We're asking not to purchase something.
Oh.
Thanks for hearing it. No, in all reality, staff completed a competitive field proposal process for 3 substation transformers. Proposals were going to be evaluated on several factors, including performance, price, warranty, and other items. After we received the proposals, we received some information. Let me back up. 2 of the 3 transformers we purchased for Cascade Steel. After we received the proposals, we got some information on some loading information that would impact the specifications for the transformer. So kind of put us in a scenario. Obviously, we have proposals for 2 transformers that wouldn't meet the requirements of Cascade. So with that, staff is seeking commission adoption of a resolution to cancel request for proposals 2024 tower transformers in accordance with ORS 27009B100 and to provide written notice of cancellation to all proposers.
Sharon, I had a question. In your the summary of what happened, you said that the proposer's failure to meet the warranty requirements. And if that happened, was that both of them or just one of them? And the second part is, does that need to be included in the motion?
Yeah, so neither proposer met, we had a 5-year requirement and neither of them met that requirement. It would have been scored, it would have been evaluated. So we had that as a criteria for evaluation.
Okay, but so it was a criteria, not a requirement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna miss.
No, you didn't make a mistake. I just don't understand.
Any other questions? Would you do the
All right, this is resolution number 2024-10, a resolution by the City of Bentonville Municipal Corporation, City of Oregon, acting by and through the Smart Light Commission, canceling the solicitation RFP number 2024 power transformers.
Accept a motion?
So moved.
I'll take it.
Motion from Commissioner Tankersley, second from Commissioner Christensen, and would the clerk please poll the commission?
Yes, Mayor Dropkin,
Aye.
Commissioner Tate,
Aye.
Commissioner Tankersley,
Aye.
Commissioner Gormley,
Aye.
Commissioner Christensen.
Aye.
And the resolution is adopted unanimously. And with that, we are gonna take a 6-minute break. And we'll see you back here at 8:02.
Okay, how'd you pick 6 minutes?
I felt too short.
So I was gonna mention also, the thing to remember is like. Right now, our interest rate is over 5%. Just that is generally,
Yeah.
if we do that $250,000 a year, that can go right back into growing that over time. You know, I thought it was kind of really expensive insurance. And
I thought it was a lot to make that decision in
Right.
combination with just getting insurance.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot more thinking that goes into that and.
And that's the thing, you know, our cash keeps growing. And so, you know, for example, let's see, right now. We are going to be generating between the two utilities, close to $3 million just in interest.
It's crazy.
So that's a good thing. I mean, it's not a
Yeah.
bad thing. And so it just.
Yeah, and if you're looking at building up a reserve quickly, that
Right.
obviously. part of the reason why we're looking
The
at-
other thing goes into this is not through CCIS.
Right, this
This
is.
is a full commission product for them.
Yeah.
Their commission is really limited. to 60 minutes. They get a fee and that's it. This is a good commission product, but I mean, I just think I think our house,
Well, and that's the other thing that, you know, our watershed's a little different too, because all of our timber, you know, we harvest here, we go somewhere else, we harvest. So we have these patches where we have this patchwork, which helps in our wildfire.
Mitigate. And yeah, and the fire could be in a place that isn't gonna be harvested
Right.
for 20 years or
Right.
40 years as opposed to, you know, some old coast, it's hard to know.
Right.
But I mean, it'd be unlikely, I think, to lose the entire watershed.
Right, and that's kind of.
and I think we have good service to contain things there too. That's.
So, you know, we had.
Compared to lot.
Yeah. We've had a couple of close calls. You know, we had the ball bearing fire.
Yeah.
Which was not far from our watershed. We had a couple others that were caused by West Oregon.
Mm.
You know, trees coming down on their lines, so.
Yeah.
We're talking to Brookfield the other day.
I'm sorry.